At 51, Suzanne Simpson seemed to have it all: a thriving career in luxury real estate, 4 beautiful children, and a picture-perfect life in the quiet, affluent streets of Alamos Park, Texas. To her friends, she was the embodiment of success and grace, the woman who could balance work, motherhood, and community with effortless charm. But on the night of October 6, 2024, that perfect image shattered. After attending an exclusive event at a private club, Suzanne vanished without a trace. Before dawn, the peaceful neighborhood was pierced by the echo of distant screams from the woods behind her home. Screams that would soon haunt investigators and neighbors alike. By morning, Suzanne was gone. Her husband, Brad, filed a missing person report, claiming confusion and concern. But as detectives began to peel back the layers of their marriage, a chilling revelation emerged months earlier. Suzanne had told her banker that if she ever went missing, people should look for her in a lake. It was a haunting premonition, one that would turn a missing person case into one of Texas's most disturbing mysteries. And as the investigation unfolded, every clue seemed to whisper the same terrifying question: what really happened to Suzanne Simpson that night? Suzanne Simpson graduated from the University of Texas at Austin in 1995 with a degree in communications. She worked for 6 years at Dell Computers before moving into real estate, a career she has enjoyed for over 13 years at Nix Realty. Colleagues say Suzanne has a deep understanding of the San Antonio real estate market and is dedicated to her clients. Whether it's the middle of the night or on a holiday, Marnie Simpson, Suzanne's sister-in-law and co-owner of Nix's Realty, said Suzanne was always upbeat, sincere, and kind. She was open, approachable, and never pretended to be something she wasn't. Suzanne is also an avid runner, having completed 22 marathons and even qualified for the Boston Marathon. She ran about 8 miles daily and valued her fitness and discipline, but above all, she was a devoted mother to her 4 children, aged 20, 18, 15, and 5. Friends described Suzanne as a hands-on mother who organized everything from kindergarten playdates to high school sports games. Her eldest daughter, Chandler, was studying fashion design in Paris and New York. At 51, Suzanne seemed to be living the ideal life with 4 children and was beloved by the community. But on October 6, 2024, after attending an exclusive event at a private club, she vanished without a trace. Suzanne and her husband, Brad Simpson, had been married for 22 years. They lived in an early 1990s bungalow in Alamos Park, an upscale, close-knit neighborhood with a reputation for safety and community vigilance. Brad, 53, stands 6 feet 3 inches tall and works as a licensed real estate agent and investor in real estate and construction projects throughout Central Texas. A graduate of Olmos Heights High School and the University of Texas at Austin in 1994, he had been associated with over a dozen Texas-based companies, though most eventually failed. Brad previously worked at Cotter & Sons, a real estate firm, from 2002 to 2012, and partnered with the owner's son, James Cotter, on several business projects, but Brad's financial situation was rocky. Between 2019 and 2020, American Express sued him twice for more than $25,000 in unpaid debt. He had also been involved in multiple legal battles, including one against Cotter & Sons, that reached the Texas Supreme Court. Acquaintances described Brad as confident but controlling and intensely jealous. One friend told investigators that Brad tracked Suzanne's phone and monitored her whereabouts. 2 months before she disappeared, in August 2024, Suzanne confided in her Frostbank personal banker Gabriela Speicher, that Brad had been physically abusive. She said he frequently took away her phone, later claiming to their children that she had lost it. During that same conversation, Suzanne made a haunting statement: if she ever went missing, they should look for her in a lake. Despite these warning signs, there were no police reports or protective orders. The abuse went unreported and hidden behind the walls of their Olmos Park home. Suzanne's mother, Barbara Clark, later confirmed knowing of at least one physical altercation between her daughter and Brad, though she believed it was an isolated incident and was deeply shocked by the revelations. Barbara had made plans for Suzanne to move in with her. Suzanne's youngest child would attend school in Barbara's neighborhood, but that plan never came to fruition, as Suzanne disappeared the night she called to say Brad had hurt her again. On that Sunday evening, Suzanne wore a short, dark dress, sun heels, and had her sandy blonde hair partially tied back. Around 8 p.m., she and Brad took their 5-year-old daughter to a party at the Argyle, a private club in Olmos Heights that had been around for 170 years. Several people reported seeing the couple arguing, then fighting. According to what their daughter later told a school counselor, Brad pushed Suzanne against a wall, hit her in the face, and injured her elbow. Suzanne and her daughter left the party around 8:30 p.m. Between 8:40 a.m. and 8:51 p.m., surveillance footage showed them shopping at an H-E-B grocery store. At 9:15 p.m., Suzanne called a family friend to say she was coming over. 1 minute later, two things happened simultaneously. Suzanne called her mother, Barbara, saying Brad had assaulted her and that she was in pain. At the same time, Brad accessed their AT&T account and suspended Suzanne's phone service. At 9:25 p.m., surveillance confirmed Suzanne arrived at her friend's home in Olmos Heights. But by 10:22 p.m., data from the Find My app showed her phone had returned to the home she and Brad shared, and that was its last known location. Between 10 and 11 p.m., a neighbor across the street heard an argument outside his window. When he looked out, he saw Brad and Suzanne fighting in the front yard. Suzanne was trying to escape, while Brad tried to pull her down. She finally broke free and ran toward the wooded area east of the house. With Brad chasing her, the neighbor went inside to get a flashlight, then heard 2 or 3 screams coming from the wooded area. Those were the last sounds anyone ever heard from Suzanne. Around midnight, the neighbor heard Brad's black 2019 GMC Sierra truck start and leave the house. 1 or 2 hours later, the truck returned. At 11 p.m., FBI forensic experts later found that Brad had started turning his phone on and off in lockdown mode, an uncommon behavior used to avoid tracking. He continued this throughout the next day. At 12:33 a.m., about an hour after the screams, HEB surveillance showed Brad's truck with a large ice chest in the bed. At 7:15 a.m., Suzanne's phone had its last recorded activity, placing it in a business parking lot in Olmos Park. The phone was never found. At 7:53 a.m., surveillance from Howard Early Childhood Center captured Brad dropping off his daughter at school. In his truck bed were at least 2 white trash bags with red ties and the same large ice chest. At 9:12 a.m., Whataburger drive-through footage in Kendall County showed his truck loaded with 3 white trash bags, a heavy-duty trash bin, an ice chest, and a large, bulky object wrapped in blue tarpaulin, weighed down with a metal firewood rack. Investigators later recorded that the object under the tarp was believed to conceal something due to its shape and size. The arrest affidavit noted that this was consistent with how criminals often conceal or transport victims to avoid detection. At 9:53 a.m., Brad's phone location showed him at a Home Depot in Boerne, Texas. Surveillance video captured him buying 2 bags of quick-set cement an orange bucket with a lid, a box of heavy-duty trash bags, a bottle of disinfectant spray, and insect repellent. He paid in cash, which was unusual for him. In the parking lot, he asked an unidentified man for directions to the nearest dump in Bern. After leaving, Brad put his phone back in lockdown mode, cycling it on and off between 10 and 11 o'clock a.m. Location data placed his truck near the Kendall County Solid Waste Facility. A few minutes later, Brad stopped at a petrol station in Bern, where he bought fuel and 2 one-gallon jugs of water. The 3 white rubbish bags that had been in the truck bed were gone. Still visible were the blue tarpaulin, firewood rack, rubbish bin, and ice chest. Brad had also changed his shoes, switching from sandals to dark cowboy boots. Location data then showed him driving west toward Bandera in Medina County, where he stayed for about 13 minutes. His phone continued cycling on and off. At 1:41 p.m., a number plate reader captured his truck returning to Bern. The blue tarpaulin was no longer visible, and the firewood rack had been moved. Around 3 o'clock p.m., the school called Brad to report that his 5-year-old daughter had not been picked up, something her mother, Suzanne, did every day. At 3:27 p.m., surveillance footage showed Brad collecting his daughter. At that point, only the ice chest and heavy-duty rubbish bin remained in the truck. The firewood rack was gone. At 4:07 p.m., Brad went to the bubble bath car wash on San Pedro. Cameras recorded him cleaning the driver's front area and the rear left passenger side of the vehicle. Later, police found dried cement splashes inside the rear passenger area, and in the truck bed, only the ice chest remained. Everything else had been removed. Brad never reported Suzanne missing. The entire day passed without him contacting police, even though she had failed to pick up their daughter. At 9:57 p.m. on October 7, nearly 24 hours since Suzanne was last heard from, a concerned friend called Brad. When she learned he hadn't contacted authorities, she told him she would file the missing persons report herself. 14 minutes later, Brad left a voicemail for Olmos Park Police Chief Fidel Villegas. He said that he had not seen his wife since 11 o'clock p.m. the night before, and that she had lost her phone at HEB. However, phone records showed her device was at home at 10:22 p.m., and Brad had suspended her service personally. Brad failed to attend a scheduled follow-up interview with police and moved to his ranch in Bandera County. He appeared to be distancing himself from his family. At 4:35 p.m., he texted James Cotter to ask if Cotter was in Bandera and if Cotter could come to his house quickly, explaining that he didn't have much time. Cotter replied that he would arrive in 40 minutes. Brad then told him to make sure he left everything at the pump, especially the gun. Then, at 8:31 p.m., Cotter texted Brad, telling him to come and promising not to tell anyone, adding that Brad was like a brother to him. On October 8, Brad created 2 notes on his phone titled "This Next Life" and "Last Will and Testament." In them, he apologized for physically assaulting Suzanne in August 2023 and again on October 6, 2024. He also called his brother Barton to apologize for the trouble he had caused. At 1:30 a.m., police arrested Brad on Interstate 10 East in Kendall County. He was charged with assault, family violence, and unlawful restraint. He had cuts and bruises on his arms and hands. Brad showed no surprise or emotion about his wife's disappearance, immediately requested a solicitor, and refused to cooperate with investigators. A search of the Simpson home revealed a new indentation on the wall at the bottom of the stairway, matching the couple's daughter's account that Brad had pushed Suzanne there. Police found 1 bag of cement, even though Brad had purchased 2, along with the heavy-duty rubbish bin, metal firewood rack, and a box of black rubbish bags. Only 28 of the 32 remained. The housekeeper confirmed that the family normally used white rubbish bags with red handles, the same kind seen in Brad's truck. In a locked gun room, police discovered multiple firearms, including an unlicensed short-barrel rifle, leading to federal charges. On October 9, Texas Rangers found a burn site on the family's Bandera County ranch where a laptop and several phones, 3 belonging to Brad, had been destroyed by fire. On October 21, police searched James Cotter's home in the upscale Dominion neighborhood. Acting on a tip from a previously reliable anonymous source, investigators searched behind a wall-mounted television in Cotter's bedroom. There, hidden in a hollowed-out section of the wall, they found a fully automatic AK-47 rifle. Evidence showed that Cotter had taken the rifle from Brad's weapons vault on October 8, just 2 days after Suzanne disappeared. Cotter was arrested and charged with evidence tampering and possession of prohibited weapons. His bond was initially set at $1 million. In December 2024, a key piece of evidence emerged that became central to the prosecution's case. A grand jury indictment revealed that Brad had deliberately hidden a reciprocating saw, an electric tool capable of cutting through metal and bone. On December 5, law enforcement notified Suzanne's family. Suzanne's DNA was found on the jigsaw that Brad had tried to hide. 1 month after she went missing, Brad was officially charged with murder. His total bond was set at $5 million. The charges included murder, tampering with evidence involving a human corpse, tampering with physical evidence, and possession of prohibited weapons. If convicted, Brad faced a sentence ranging from 5 to 99 years, or possibly life in prison. Lead prosecutor Casey Sandoval noted that although no body had been recovered, that did not prevent them from filing the case. He emphasized that the law does not tolerate those who dispose of a victim's body. On December 3, 2024, Brad's defense attorney, Stephen Gilmore, filed a motion to dismiss the indictment. He argued it was too vague and failed to specify how Suzanne died or the act that caused her death. Without a body or a medical examiner's report, he claimed the defense could not adequately respond to the charges. The motion was argued before Judge Joel Perez on April 22, 2025. Prosecutor Sandoval countered that Texas law did not require proof of the exact method of killing, only that Brad intended to kill Suzanne and caused her death. On April 29, Judge Perez denied the motion, ruling that prosecutors had presented enough evidence for the murder charge to proceed. The case would go to trial. Despite Suzanne's body still being missing, Texas Rangers, Olmos Park Police, FBI agents, and local sheriff's departments searched extensively across 3 Texas counties. They focused on wooded areas where neighbors had reported hearing screams, parts of Interstate 10 near where Brad was arrested, and Brad's ranch in Bandera County. By October 2025, a year later, Suzanne Simpson's body had still not been found. Texas DPS spokesperson Dion Cockrell stated that searches would continue for as long as necessary, noting that remains are sometimes discovered even years later. On November 5, 2024, Brad and Suzanne's 20-year-old daughter, Chandler, posted a viral statement on Instagram. She said that her father had taken her mother's life in a state of rage and control. She added that women in Olmos Heights had been told to keep quiet and that it was time to speak for her mother. Statements from Chandler and her siblings contradicted Brad's account, helping police secure the search warrant that led to the discovery behind Cotter's wall. On September 22, 2025, Judge Perez confirmed that both sides had received sufficient evidence to move forward. The case materials included 5 to 6 terabytes of data, surveillance video, phone records, and forensic reports. Brad remained in the Bexar County Jail under administrative segregation, confined to his cell for 23 hours each day. Pre-trial hearings were scheduled for January 20, 2026, with the trial set to begin on February 13, 2026. The prosecution's evidence included the neighbor's eyewitness account of screams and struggle, Suzanne's DNA on the saw, video tracking Brad's movements with wrapped objects, receipts for cement and trash bags, burned electronics, the secret AK-47, and Brad's written admissions of past assaults. Investigators believe that, based on the timeline and available evidence, Brad attacked Suzanne soon after she returned home that night. Sometime between 10 and 11 o'clock p.m., a neighbor reported seeing a physical struggle in the front yard before Suzanne managed to escape and run toward the woods, with Brad chasing after her. The screams that followed were the last sounds anyone heard from Suzanne. Investigators think Brad killed her in or near the woods, most likely by strangulation, and then brought her body back home. The next morning, a neighbor saw a large, bulky object wrapped in blue tarpaulin in Brad's truck. Combined with Suzanne's DNA found on a reciprocating saw, this suggests that he dismembered her remains. His careful actions over the next several hours, visiting dumps, buying cement, and making multiple trips across county lines, point to a calculated effort to dispose of her body and eliminate evidence. Legal experts consider the case to be strongly supported by circumstantial evidence. A year after Suzanne Simpson's disappearance, her body has still not been recovered. Her daughter, Chandler, continues to raise awareness about domestic violence and vows to be her mother's voice until she is found. The Texas Department of Public Safety continues the search. While the community awaits trial, everyone is working together to bring justice for Suzanne, even though the journey to bring her home is not yet complete. Nanette Krenle grew up in New Orleans in a humble, close-knit family. Her parents, Dan and Pat Watson, raised her along with her siblings Kim, Eliza, and 3 half-siblings, and taught her important values of loyalty and kindness, known for her gentle and caring nature. Nanette had a deep love for animals and shared her home with 2 cats and a dog. Despite moving away, she maintained a close bond with her family, especially her father and sisters, speaking with them daily. In 1994, at 27 years old, Nanette met Steve Krenle while applying for a job at his office supply store. Steve, then 28, owned both a scuba gear business and the store, and was going through a divorce at the time. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and after Steve finalized his divorce, he introduced Nanette to his young son, Justin. By 1995, they were married. Steve's native of Louisiana. He grew up near Lacombe and reportedly had a tense relationship with his brother, Brian. In 2000, Steve and Nanette moved to Lacombe, closer to his parents. He gradually worked his way up in the Tammany Parish Fire Department, eventually becoming the fire chief. Respected for his professionalism, his career in the fire department provided him with financial security and influence in the community. In 1997, after Steve sold both of his businesses, Nanette shifted her career path. She began working at a daycare center, where her kind and attentive nature earned the trust of parents and co-workers. Beyond her job, she became involved in the community, organizing fundraisers and charitable events, as well as supporting local fire departments by selling handmade ceramics and baked goods. By 2017, she had been out of the workforce for several years, focusing instead on her home, her pets, and continued community involvement. Although she had no children, Nanette was always concerned and attentive to the lives of her loved ones. She often played a central role in family matters, offering emotional and financial support to her loved ones. To outsiders, she and Steve seemed to lead a peaceful life, residing on 100 acres of scenic remote property in Lacombe. However, behind closed doors, Nanette grew increasingly concerned for her safety after Steve's brother, Brian, was released from prison. Brian allegedly blamed Nanette for the legal issues that led to his incarceration and had made direct threats against her. In response, she urged for additional security measures, having cameras installed around the property and keeping protective tools in her bedroom, car, and purse. She openly shared her fears with her family. Her father and sisters, aware of the escalating tension, were alarmed but did not anticipate just how grave the situation would become. Steve was also concerned and worked with Nanette to increase security. He installed additional cameras, purchased self-defense equipment, and even practiced shooting with her at a local shooting range. However, despite these precautions, the simmering problems in their family did not go away. Behind the facade of a peaceful life, there were bitter family conflicts, growing tensions, and the choices ahead led to unforeseen consequences. On July 14, 2017, at around 2:30 p.m., the St. Tammany Parish Fire Department received an urgent call from Steve's cousin, who lived nearby. He reported seeing thick smoke rising from Steve's property and suspected the house was on fire. Despite the distance between their homes and the dense forest in between, the fire was visible from afar. Steve and his team arrived at the scene around 3 p.m. when the house was engulfed in flames. Firefighters worked into the evening to extinguish the fire, only to discover human remains in the bathroom of the master bedroom. The damage was extensive, but the location of the remains and the fact that no one else lived there indicated the victim was likely Nanette, Steve's wife. No alarms had sounded, and throughout the day, Steve's repeated calls to both Nanette's cell phone and the house landline had gone unanswered. Her car remained in the garage, further confirming she had been home at the time of the fire. Tragically, all the household pets also perished, reflecting the sudden and intense nature of the flames. Federal fire investigation specialists joined the inquiry. Initially, the fire was considered a possible accident, but the circumstances surrounding Nanette's death raised suspicions. Her remains were found in the bathroom, and there was no indication she had tried to escape. This prompted a forensic autopsy, which included DNA testing and an investigation into the cause of death. About a week later, during a memorial service, part of the coroner's preliminary findings became public. It was revealed that Nanette had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, with a bullet found in her skull. This discovery completely shifted the direction of the investigation. On July 18th, the sheriff confirmed the findings, apologized for the delay in communication, and acknowledged evidence of a criminal act. Further autopsy results showed no smoke inhalation in Nanette's lungs, proving that she had died before the fire. Since no weapon was found near her body, the possibility of self-inflicted injuries has been ruled out. The investigation further revealed the presence of 9 security cameras on the property, but Steve stated that the system had stopped functioning several days before the fire. Efforts to recover footage from the damaged equipment were unsuccessful. This lack of evidence, combined with forensic findings, suggested the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence. Investigators shifted their focus to individuals who might have had both motive and access to the property. However, an official statement confirming foul play in Nanette's death was not released until 4 days after the fire. The family's frustration with the investigation grew, particularly because the coroner had noted the gunshot wound the day after the incident, yet this information wasn't immediately shared with them. Nanette's sister, Kim, a prosecutor in Nebraska, publicly criticized the investigation, pointing to the lack of proper scene containment, which may have compromised evidence. When Nanette's relatives arrived in Louisiana shortly after the tragedy, they found the property unsecured and the house open. Within 2 days, Steve was allowed to return to the site, raising concerns about evidence being altered or lost. It wasn't until Steve's son, Justin, discovered a fragment of a human skull in the debris that authorities finally secured the scene. The incident has left the public losing confidence in Sheriff Randy Smith's department. While federal investigators conduct an independent analysis, they discovered multiple points of ignition and traces of accelerants, confirming the fire was deliberately set. Despite these findings, however, the sheriff did not rule out the possibility that Julie harmed herself, citing the lack of a recovered weapon and inconclusive ballistics test results. Later, 2 firearms were found in the remains of the home, but neither could be definitively linked to the fatal shot. The bullet recovered from Nanette's skull was too damaged for reliable analysis. Additional forensic tests reinforced previous findings, including finding no smoke in Nanette's lungs and no food in her stomach. Despite her having been seen purchasing food at a fast food restaurant that morning, additional inconsistencies came to light during the investigation. There was no blood on Nanette's gunshot wound to the head, as is often the case, leading to speculation that her body may have been moved after her death. An independent expert suggested that whoever moved her was likely familiar with the layout of the house. The sheriff, however, publicly disputed the forensic expert's conclusions. This discrepancy with the findings of federal agents further undermined public confidence in the investigation. Nanette's family began openly questioning the integrity of local authorities and raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest. As discrepancies mounted, the sheriff was eventually compelled to issue a public statement, acknowledging that Nanette's death resulted from a violent act. Despite this admission, the investigation failed to identify the person responsible. The case shifted towards exploring possible motives and suspects with access to the property. Nanette's husband, Steve, was naturally a key subject of interest due to his unrestricted access to the house. He willingly cooperated, volunteered for a polygraph test, and passed. However, since polygraph results are not entirely reliable, investigators didn't eliminate him as a suspect. Steve's alibi was backed by fire department security footage confirming he was at work on the day of the incident, starting at 8 a.m., and didn't leave at any point, including during lunch. This was corroborated by surveillance footage and his co-workers' testimonies. However, it was noted that Steve, working on a Friday, was unusual, as he usually took that day off. Investigators also analyzed Nanette's movements on the morning of July 14th. Traffic cameras spotted her driving between her home and a nearby fast food restaurant, where her bank card was used to buy food. Her car was later seen near her house. About an hour later, a phone call was made from Nanette's phone to an unfamiliar number. The person on the other end claimed not to know her, and the reason for the call remains unexplained. Investigators explored potential personal conflicts and discovered that Steve had been in an extramarital relationship with a colleague. Nanette was aware of the affair and had told others she was considering divorce, which under state law would involve dividing their shared assets, an arrangement that could have been financially disadvantageous for Steve. When questioned, Steve admitted to the affair but claimed the couple had reconciled and planned to stay together. Close family members were also questioned. Steve's son, Justin, had reportedly experienced tension with his stepmother, Julie. In the past, family acquaintances described him as having unusual interests, including a fascination with firearms. However, Justin provided documentation proving he was out of state for work on the day of the incident, which was verified, ruling him out as a suspect. Investigators also looked into Steve's brother, Brian, who had a criminal record and a history of family conflicts. Over the years, Nanette had voiced concerns about his behavior. Shortly after his release from prison, she sent her sister a message describing a specific threat from him, in which he allegedly displayed aggressiveness and hinted at setting the house on fire. These claims were corroborated through their text exchanges. Surveillance footage from their parents' home showed Brian did not leave the premises on the day of Nanette's death. However, a wearable tracking device issued to him malfunctioned and failed to record any location data that day, with the cause of this failure unexplained. Another puzzling incident occurred a month before Nanette's death. A security camera recorded an unidentified man near the entrance gate of the property. He left behind a cigarette butt and a knife. Nanette informed her father about the incident, but the man's identity remained unclear and no investigation was conducted to find out more. After investigating multiple leads, the case remained unsolved. Every suspect either had a confirmed alibi or there wasn't enough evidence to make a formal accusation, leaving the investigation at a dead end. 2 months after Nanette's death, the sheriff made another public announcement. He declared that Steve was no longer a person of interest in the case, explaining that Steve's alibi had been verified. There was no clear motive, and the evidence was deemed insufficient to move forward. However, Nanette's family felt this announcement was premature, as not all digital records had been reviewed. Several witnesses had yet to be re-interviewed, and a detailed timeline of her phone activity leading up to her death was still incomplete. It appeared the investigation was entering a state of stagnation. When Nanette's family requested access to the case documents, their attempts were met with vague responses. Louisiana state law restricts access to investigative materials to the closest next of kin, which in this case was Steve, not Nanette's parents or sisters. Steve did not share these documents with the rest of the family. In search of answers, Nanette's relatives turned to private attorneys and independent forensic experts. One expert, after examining the available evidence, identified signs of deliberate investigative mismanagement, noting that critical protocols for handling cases involving violent deaths and burnt evidence had been disregarded. The conclusions and methodologies of the private experts sharply contrasted with those of the local authorities. Efforts to transfer the case to a different jurisdiction proved unsuccessful. Appeals to the district attorney's office were dismissed, with officials citing a lack of legal justification to relocate the investigation. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Nanette's family turned to social media, launching a page to provide updates and highlight inconsistencies in the investigation, in the hope of pressuring authorities into action. However, the sheriff's actions became a significant obstacle to achieving transparency. His public statements, dismissal of expert findings, and personal connections to individuals potentially linked to the case raised concerns about his impartiality and deepened public mistrust. Despite multiple individuals with potential motives, the investigation failed to reach a definite conclusion. Detectives worked on verifying alibis, analyzing technical records, and identifying gaps in the official narrative. But these efforts often revealed inconsistencies that undermined the credibility of the evidence. A key issue was the absence of location data from the Jeep's-enabled ankle monitor worn by Brian. On July 14th, the day of the incident, the monitor registered no location data, an unexplained blackout. Authorities were unable to determine whether the failure was a technical error or whether the monitor had been intentionally disabled. This missing data represented a major accountability failure and raised serious questions. Another troubling discovery came from a review of footage from a security camera inside Brian's parents' home. The video depicted Brian with a working desk lamp and a visible wall clock in the background, ostensibly providing an alibi. However, Nanette's family questioned the authenticity of this footage, suggesting it could have been pre-recorded or staged. Experts also observed that the angle and focus of the camera appeared unusual for a standard household surveillance setup. Additional uncertainty arose with surveillance footage from a fast food establishment showing Nanette's vehicle. Investigators assumed she was driving the car that morning, but the video quality was too poor to verify her identity. This assumption was based solely on her bank card being used to make a purchase nearby. The situation was further complicated by the fact that there was no footage from her home surveillance system on the day of the incident. Steve claimed the cameras had not been operational at the time, but investigators later found traces of accelerant on the damaged equipment. Experts concluded that the security system had likely been intentionally tampered with before the fire, suggesting someone with knowledge of the camera's locations and purpose had interfered. After Nanette's father passed away, her sisters took the lead in demanding a proper investigation. They launched an online awareness campaign, collaborated with advocacy groups, and participated in discussions on crime-focused platforms. The family repeatedly urged state authorities to transfer the case to an independent investigative body, but their requests were consistently met with generic responses that lacked meaningful action. They were also frustrated by the investigators' failure to review footage from the citywide surveillance system, which could have offered critical context. These shortcomings formed the basis of formal complaints to the district attorney's office. Although officials promised to keep the case open, there was no evidence of real progress, receiving minimal support from local law enforcement. Nanette's family shifted their focus to building a network of allies. They connected with organizations specializing in unresolved cases, which led to increased attention on Nanette's death through podcasts, videos, and media coverage. By 2024, the case remained unsolved. However, new hope appeared when Colin Sims was elected district attorney. Colin publicly expressed his willingness to review the evidence, marking the first sign of possible investigative progress after nearly 7 years of inaction. As of March 2024, Nanette's case was still open, with no charges filed against any suspects. Despite coroner findings, witness testimonies, and independent assessments, authorities in St. Tammany Parish had yet to identify any responsible parties. What initially seemed like a straightforward case had instead devolved into a prolonged stalemate. By mid-2025, the case records were still sealed, and only individuals with legal standing, such as Nanette's husband, Steve, were granted access. The family remained barred from reviewing complete investigative reports, transcripts, or relevant surveillance data. Repeated appeals to state authorities went unanswered. In response, a grassroots group formed by Nanette's friends and family continued to provide social media updates, urging the public to come forward with any useful information. The family also sought assistance from federal agencies like the Department of Justice. In their letters, they raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest involving local authorities and petitioned for the case to be transferred to a higher jurisdiction. Independent experts consulted by the family identified numerous investigative avenues that had not been fully explored, including recovering deleted digital records and re-interviewing key witnesses. However, without official investigative authority, these proposals could not be enforced. Despite years of stagnation, Nanette's family has never stopped fighting for answers. For them, this is about more than personal grief. It is a pursuit of justice. The lack of progress has only strengthened their resolve. They firmly believe the truth can still be uncovered if independent expertise is brought in and the case is reviewed impartially. As of this report, the case remains open but inactive. Nanette Krenle's story highlights how errors, delays, and possible bias can obstruct justice in a major case. Yet, it also demonstrates the unwavering resilience of a family determined to keep her memory alive. Their goal remains unchanged: to uncover the truth, no matter how much time has passed or how many obstacles stand in their way. On a quiet afternoon in January, the small town in Waller County, Texas, was suddenly shaken by a scene so horrifying that even the most seasoned police officers shuddered. In a guest house located on a large plot of land owned by a wealthy family, blood was splattered on the floor, covering the walls and ceiling. In the middle of the room, the body of a young woman lay motionless, her head severed, a bloody knife thrown next to her. It was Angi, just 21 years old, an immigrant from Nicaragua with dreams of building a bright future in America. The person standing in that room, eerily calm, was her husband, Angi Dykus, 23 years old, the only son of a prestigious family in the area. How did a love story once considered the American dream turn into a terrible tragedy? Why would a young man born into wealth, raised in a powerful family, commit such a barbaric crime? This is not just a murder, but a bloody warning about the control and violence hidden behind the facade of a seemingly perfect marriage. And to understand how things spiraled into tragedy, we have to go back to the beginning, where two seemingly opposite people collided. Angi Dykus was born and raised in Waller County, Texas. just over an hour's drive from Houston. His family was famous and wealthy in the area, owning a lot of real estate and land. They lived in a large house, prominent amidst the vast farms. Previously, the family had a large house and a smaller guest house, but as he grew up, the guest house was converted into his own private residence. Jared chose to live there, realizing the dream of many young Americans by not having to rent a house. He and his young wife, Angi, have lived here together. Angi was born in Nicaragua in 2001. When she grew up, she immigrated to the United States in search of a better life. Unlike Jared, her career path was initially difficult. Angi was born into a poor family. From a young age, she witnessed financial hardship. This made her hardworking and always helping her family. She is also a calm and friendly person. When she came to America, she kept a calm attitude, liked to work to support herself and help her family. Angi dreamed of building a good future. She wanted to marry an American, to settle down and receive support. With her charming appearance and sweet personality, she attracted Jared from the first meeting. At that time, she had just moved here and did not have many friends. In just a few years, Angi found a place to live and did many things at the same time. Everyone saw that she was happy with her successes. She had many big plans for the future and believed in a good life in America, but she did not expect that she was wrong. Jared and Angi's lives intersected at the end of 2022. Those who know Jared all realized that he was attracted to Angi from the first meeting. He described her as an energetic and charming girl with whom he wanted to build a romantic relationship. Angi, on the other hand, had similar feelings and took the initiative to approach Jared. She saw in him the ideal future husband and father. Despite the cultural and language barriers, her English was not good. She took the initiative. Surprisingly, just a month after meeting, in October 2022, they announced their marriage. They held a small, private ceremony. At first glance, their story seemed like a dream come true for Angi. She had her own house in a small town, and it seemed that this girl from Nicaragua could build an ideal American family, have children, and develop a career. Jared had everything she needed to help her do that. Jared was the son of a wealthy family, had no money problems. He truly loved Angi. However, behind this perfect appearance, everything was not good. Before getting married, Angi regularly updated her social media profile, posting photos and various posts, but after getting married, the number of posts gradually decreased. She almost stopped taking photos with Jared after the wedding. Relatives began to ask about this change, because it was unlike the active and sociable girl like Angi, but she avoided these questions. Many people suspected that Jared had forbidden her to do those things. Angi just evaded, saying that there was no violence in their relationship, but admitted that her husband had an influence on her, making her emotionally exhausted. This did not surprise anyone. Although Jared's family was considered kind, many locals knew that he had a criminal record. He also had problems with banned substances and alcohol. His parents knew this, but they did not tell Angi because they believed that marriage would have a positive effect on their son and that he would give up his bad habits. However, the reality was quite the opposite. Soon after the wedding, Jared began to behave worse. The community knew Jared was prone to drunkenness, using banned substances, and behaving inappropriately. He was aggressive and often in trouble with the law. His first drunk driving arrest, compounded by threats to the police, brought him to their attention. Many believed he avoided jail only because of his wealthy parents. Some locals hoped Angi could help Jared change after the two got married. After the wedding, they moved into a large guest house on Jared's family land. The parents gave them the long unused guest house, hoping they would be comfortable and independent. However, This plan backfired on Angi, who became isolated instead of finding peace. Jared controlled her communication with her family, completely dominating her life with his family, rules, and habits. Angi, a resilient woman who had overcome many challenges since moving to the United States, viewed this as another obstacle. She had grown up in harsh conditions and worked hard to improve her life, initially arriving in Texas without documents, leading to constant fear of deportation to Nicaragua. Before the wedding, finding and registering for a job was difficult. Angi hoped marriage and legal status would ease her struggles, but Jared quickly exploited this vulnerability, pressuring her into submission. She feared losing everything she had worked for if she divorced him. Before meeting Jared, she had taken on numerous part-time jobs to make ends meet. After the wedding, she continued this relentless work ethic, waking before dawn to work at a local gym and then working at a fast food restaurant until late. Marriage did not bring the ease she had hoped for. She still had to work constantly. However, after the wedding, some jobs became irrelevant. She had to look for new part-time jobs, while Jared remained mostly unemployed. He found occasional work, but rarely stayed longer than a month. The small town likely contributed to his difficulties. Everyone knew of Jared's troubled past, making it hard for him to find steady employment. Some believed he was struggling to find his place, while others saw him as exploiting his parents' wealth. He could be charming when he wanted to be. However, this charm faded after marrying Angi, revealing his impulsiveness, insecurity, and anger. Angi was unaware of Jared's persistent behavioral problems until they became apparent after they were married. Within the first month, things changed. Angi began to withdraw from her friends and loved ones. Co-workers noticed her shift from cheerful to depressed, often seeing her crying in secret. She started wearing long sleeves, even in hot weather, as if hiding something. The situation was further complicated by the language barrier. Jared didn't speak Spanish, and Angi's English was limited. Eventually, her inner circle realized that Jared had become her de facto translator, her only link to the outside world, a role he manipulated for his own benefit. He began to control and dominate her. Even as his banned substance use increased, he would leave home and return late at night. Neighbors began to hear their loud arguments and screaming. In public, Angi acted as if everything was fine. She didn't share her problems, kept working hard, and avoided discussing her family life. Many people suspect she was abused both physically and mentally, but she has never confirmed it. She often showed her forearms without bruises, despite wearing long sleeves. She explained her new preference for modest clothing as a response to her husband's jealousy. He didn't want other men looking at her. In late 2022, 3 months after their marriage, those close to Angi and Jared sensed deep tension. The honeymoon ended quickly. Jared, a strong and unstable young man, became increasingly dominant and showed little concern for Angi. She struggled to talk about her problems due to a language barrier and her husband's strict control. She had no family in the U.S. to rely on. They lived on Jared's family estate, and although Jared's parents could have helped, they did not intervene. Angi's co-workers, who had known her for years, noticed she had changed. She once laughed off Jared's quirks, but later confided to a few friends that he controlled her completely. She still hoped things would improve, but they didn't. She told friends Jared often came home drunk, leading to frequent arguments. Angi began arriving at work, exhausted. She continued to deny domestic violence, yet understood she was in a vulnerable position. Her family was thousands of miles away. She had no car, little support, and her immigration status made her fearful and dependent on Jared. His parents also noticed changes in him. He grew withdrawn, irritable, and aggressive. They felt Angi pushed back against his behavior, rather than trying to control him, but still did nothing. Believing the relationship would eventually make Jared more responsible, they think Angi and Jared just need time. Perhaps Jared's parents felt more at ease because Angi and Jared lived nearby, and their quarrels seemed to be nothing more than shouting. No one had seen physical violence. Angi believed Jared's behavior was driven by alcohol and banned substances, which made him paranoid and aggressive. By the end of 2022, Angi told a friend she was determined to help Jared return to normal. Loyal and supportive by nature, she didn't want to give up. But the crisis continued. In early January 2023, she posted a short video on social media. She was drinking coffee alone, listening to music, and appeared happier by herself than with her husband. The post had a brief, reflective caption. Tragically, she had only days left to live. The morning of January 11, 2023, began like any other. For months, she had followed the same routine. Wake up, eat breakfast, get ready for work, and post a photo of her meal online. Later that day, Jared came home drunk. An argument started and ended abruptly. Around 5 p.m., Jared went to his parents' main house and calmly told them he had a problem. He asked them to come to the guest house where he lived with Angi. The moment they stepped inside, they were horrified. Angi's body lay on the living room floor. She had been decapitated. Blood covered the floors, walls, and even the ceiling. A blood-stained kitchen knife lay nearby, shaken but resolute. Jared's parents did not protect him. They immediately called 911. When police arrived at the guest house, they were stunned by the brutality. Even seasoned officers had never seen such a gruesome scene in their quiet town. Jared was present. He neither fled nor denied responsibility. He confessed to killing his wife, speaking with a disturbing lack of emotion. The police believe Jared was in a compromised state, possibly drunk, high, or experiencing mental health issues. Detectives reconstructed the timeline to understand what led to the tragedy, focusing on Jared's actions before he attacked his wife, Angi. Surveillance cameras showed Jared entering several stores around the city. In one, he walked in barefoot and bought a case of beer. The salesman later said he looked strange but not aggressive. Then he went home, where Angi was waiting. Jared claimed Angi was upset with him, and they argued again. He couldn't clearly remember how the violence began. He said her anger was tied to jealousy and job issues, and he believed he had seen an inappropriate text on her phone. However, a review of Angi's phone found no incriminating messages. She had been texting a co-worker about plans for later that day. Regardless, Jared, under the influence of alcohol and banned substance, became enraged. The situation escalated quickly. Jared grabbed a kitchen knife and attacked Angi. She suffered multiple stab and slash wounds. She showed little sign of defensive injuries, suggesting Jared may have attacked without warning. The medical examiner concluded that when the beheading began, Angi was likely already dead or unconscious from blood loss. The attempted dismemberment intensified the brutality of the crime. It wasn't to hide the body. It appeared intended to desecrate the victim. Forensic teams spent a long time collecting evidence throughout the blood-soaked guest house. They found Angi's head on the floor in a nearby room and gathered dozens of evidence, samples. Blood drops and splatters were everywhere. Examiners confirmed that a common kitchen knife was used for both the murder and the decapitation. Detectives were shocked by Jared's demeanor. He showed no remorse when speaking with police. Jared recounted the graphic details without hesitation or emotion. He even tried to minimize his responsibility, claiming Angi had insulted him, an argument untenable. Given the manner of her death, Angi's body was sent for autopsy, and her family in Nicaragua was notified. Tragically, her family could not afford to travel to the United States or repatriate her remains. The local community responded with compassion and organized a fundraiser. Residents were horrified by the cruelty of the crime and questioned whether it could have been prevented. Strikingly, the crime occurred just a short distance from Jared's parents' home, yet they did not intervene. Jared was taken into custody and cooperated with numerous interrogations. He confessed at the scene and later repeated his account in detail at the station. Even while describing the beheading of his 21-year-old wife, he remained calm, with a soft, even voice, treating the killing as if it were routine. He said their relationship had always involved jealousy and control. He claimed there was no love. He believed she wanted legal stability in the country, and he wanted intimacy. When describing the murder, Jared said that in his rage he felt detached, as if someone else were committing the act, suggesting possible mental issues. Investigators, however, concluded the facts pointed to premeditated murder, not mental illness or intoxication. His actions were deliberate. Notably, before going to his parents to tell them Angi was dead, Jared showered, changed clothes, and then went to a store to buy more alcohol. After confessing, Jared was charged with first-degree murder and held on $500,000 bail. He couldn't afford it, and his parents refused to pay. He was admitted to a mental health monitoring unit due to concerns he might try to harm himself, and was placed under closer supervision. His attorney pursued an insanity defense from the start and requested psychiatric evaluations. While Jared awaited trial, multiple assessments of his mental state were conducted. Preliminary hearings were set for early 2024. Prosecutors argued Jared was competent to stand trial, while the defense sought independent evaluations. Throughout 2023, local residents who cared about Angi held vigils, joined by her colleagues and friends, all describing her as a bright, positive person who did not deserve such a fate. Her body was eventually returned to Nicaragua, where her family held the funeral. Meanwhile, Jared's family has cooperated with the police from the beginning. They were shocked by what he had done and were in regular contact with investigators. For a time, they were even considered possible participants in the abuse Angi suffered, but that suspicion was quickly dismissed. It became clear they had noticed warning signs but did not recognize their seriousness. Hoping marriage would help their son, 4 months after the wedding, Angi was murdered. Neighbors provided valuable information, reporting frequent, heated arguments between the couple. Rumors circulated that the relationship was mutually abusive. A nearby neighbor said he heard their last major argument a few days before the killing. The relationship appeared very toxic. Community members spoke out about the tragedy, noting cultural differences between immigrants and native-born Americans, and warning that rushing into marriage can be an alarming sign. Still, the debate changed little. Despite Jared's confession, the motive for the murder and beheading remained unclear. Many believed substance abuse and untreated mental illness were major factors. This reignited discussions about early detection and intervention for such problems. Jared awaited trial in jail. Prosecutors said they would seek the maximum penalty under Texas law, including the death penalty. The defense leaned heavily on an insanity plea, suggesting Jared had an undiagnosed mental illness. He was described as emotionally unstable, with a long history of banned substance use and likely untreated mental health issues. Prosecutors argued the insanity defense would fail, pointing to Jared's calm demeanor and apparent awareness after the crime as signs of premeditation. They also revealed he had been arrested in November 2022 for drunk driving and released on bail. Citing public safety concerns, they asked to double his $500,000 bail. The judge agreed, and Jared remained in custody following the trial. 23 years old, Angi Dykus was sentenced to 40 years in prison. With eligibility for parole after 20 years, he will be eligible in 2043. Meanwhile, Angi's loved ones in Nicaragua continue to mourn her loss. Thanks to fundraising efforts, her family was able to bring her body home. Her mother gave a Spanish-language interview on a local television channel, tearfully describing Angi as responsible, bright, and devoted to her family. Angi worked tirelessly in the United States and regularly sent money back home. She had dreamed of becoming a nurse. Angi was especially worried about her aunt, who had cancer and lacked access to treatment. Helping her aunt was one of the reasons Angi traveled to the United States. Her story highlights how vulnerable immigration status can make someone. She faced language barriers, struggled to protect herself, and could not fully access support from law enforcement. Jared's actions also devastated his own family. His parents were accused of neglect and indifference, but they insisted they never imagined their son could commit what they call the most brutal crime in Waller County's history. Betrayal doesn't always come with raised voices or broken vows. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as love and care, a glass of water, a vitamin handed at bedtime, a calm voice saying, "Everything will be fine." For Hannah, that betrayal came from the one person she trusted most, her husband. As Hannah weakened day by day, Brian was more than her caretaker. He was the source of her suffering. Behind his polished image as a chiropractor and devoted father, he had set up a financial plan not for their future, but for the time after her death. He'd taken out multiple life insurance policies totaling over $1 million, all listing him as the sole beneficiary. What looked like devotion was, in truth, calculation. What seemed like protection was exploitation. And in the end, the man who vowed to cherish his wife in sickness and in health used her sickness as the path to his own fortune. This is the story of a marriage that became a contract of death, where love was poisoned for profit. Hannah lived in Decatur, Alabama, in a home organized entirely around her children's routines. Her days revolved around early wake-ups, daycare drop-offs, meals, naps, and evening activities. She manages the household and works part-time as a skincare specialist, sometimes seeing clients at home, sometimes at a guest house. She did not pursue a steady full-time career. Her husband, Brian Mann, was the family's financial breadwinner, allowing her to focus on housework and raising the children. They married in 2018. By the time of these events, Hannah was in her early 20s. Brian, her husband, was a local chiropractor who ran his own practice. Brian's clinic had a reputation for order and professionalism, friendly receptionists, spotless rooms, and strict scheduling. Patients praised his attentive consultations, personalized treatment plans, and reliable follow-up for chronic conditions. His strong reputation brought steady referrals, and the community trusted him. Brian's family lived simply but comfortably. Supported by the clinic's income, big expenses were planned in advance. But when it came to the children, they didn't hesitate to spend. Neighbors saw a neat house, a well-kept yard, weekend outings, all painted a picture of a perfect life. Successful husband, good wife, 2 young children, a peaceful lifestyle, but inside, things were more rigid than they seemed. Brian controlled many domestic decisions and gradually isolated Hannah from others. After the wedding, her meetups with friends dwindled. Appointments were often postponed or cancelled because of inconvenience, bad timing, or no one to look after the kids. She left social media and was eventually locked out of her accounts. Brian said it was for privacy and safety. He kept access to their shared email and passwords. He handled nearly all household administration, subscriptions, bills, appointments, while Hannah's days were consumed by home tasks. Mornings were for getting everyone else ready. Afternoons went to errands, cooking, and laundry. Evenings followed the children's schedules. She rarely visited the clinic, and only when necessary. Brian told others, and likely himself, that everything was under control. He cited his medical background at home too. Advice on sleep, vitamins, and nutrition. Appearing deeply involved in family life, that's how it looked. A well-ordered life, growing control within the household, and the slow erasure of Hannah's personal space. In mid-2021, a change came that seemed harmless at first. Leveraging his role as a health professional, Brian suggested Hannah start a daily vitamin regimen tailored to support her as a busy mother with little time to rest. He said the supplements came from his clinic, ensuring quality and safety. They were chewable gummies and powdered drinks. Trusting his advice, Hannah accepted it as a routine wellness step. Soon it was habit. Each evening, Brian brought the supplements to the bedroom with a glass of water. If she forgot, he gently reminded her, stressing consistency and promising benefits with regular use. His persistence looked like care. A few weeks later, Hannah began to notice slight changes in her body. Fatigue, dizziness. She attributed it to the workload of housework and childcare. Gradually, the symptoms became more severe. Back pain, frequent stomach pain. Her diet hadn't changed, yet she was losing weight. By the end of summer, her clothes hung loosely. Even though she hadn't tried to slim down, Brian stayed calm. As Hannah's symptoms emerged, he told her that her body was adjusting to improved nutrition, that any side effects were temporary, and that she would feel stronger within a few months. He spoke with absolute confidence, drawing on his medical background. Hannah wasn't alarmed. Her symptoms developed slowly, without any sudden crisis. Occasional good days made her think she might be recovering. Even as her energy declined and her weight continued to drop, it was this period that laid the foundation for a health condition that quickly became serious and dangerous. By late summer 2021, Hannah's condition had worsened significantly. Nausea set in, making it difficult to eat regularly. From September 2021 to January 2022, she lost nearly 40 pounds, dropping to about 84 pounds. Even doing daily housework left her breathless and exhausted. Standing in the kitchen for long was hard. She felt dizzy and had lower back pain. Stairs exhausted her. Eventually, she struggled to stay balanced and began using a rolling office chair to move around the house to reduce strain and avoid falls. Nighttime muscle cramps increased, and her sleep became shallow and restless. Despite Hannah's obvious decline in health, Brian discouraged her from seeking medical attention. He insisted he could manage her routine himself and framed her symptoms as the stress of parenting, seasonal fatigue, and lack of sleep, saying they didn't require professional attention. At the same time, Brian tightened control over the household. He decided when Hannah should rest, reminded her to take the supplements he provided, and personally brought her water to keep her on his schedule. He recommended at-home remedies, more rest, hydration, and light stretches, demonstrating them as safe and effective. He stayed soft-spoken and attentive, projecting care. By late fall, fatigue overshadowed everything else. Lifting her son and daughter became difficult. Hannah often asked them to wait while she sat to catch her breath. She had to spread out chores. Simple tasks took hours. By December, the contrast between how she looked and how she felt was clear. Her clothes hung loose and her face looked sunken. Yet her temperature was normal. Adding to the confusion, she knew she was getting worse but couldn't understand why. Her diet and workload hadn't changed. By early January 2022, Hannah was in crisis. Standing caused sudden weakness and brief vision blurring. Eating was a struggle. Food sometimes repulsed her, and a few bites could trigger nausea. Moving around without support became dangerous. She relied on the rolling chair to get from room to room. Still, Brian remained steadfast. He kept saying, "The worst is over," insisting she just needed more time to recover. He stayed calm, managed details, issued reminders, and spoke with unwavering confidence. When Hannah's condition became life-threatening, she did not seek help on her own. Her mother, visiting occasionally, recognized the danger and decided to act without telling Brian. Hannah could barely walk, so her mother helped her dress and guided her to the car. On the way to the hospital, Hannah said little, mostly describing abdominal pain and extreme weakness. At the University of Alabama Hospital emergency room, her mother immediately told staff that her condition had been deteriorating for months without medical care. Doctors began by checking the basics: weight, blood pressure, temperature, and heart rate. The results were alarming. Hannah's weight was dangerously low. Her pulse was weak, and her blood pressure was unstable. Physicians initially considered a broad range of causes, from chronic conditions to serious systemic illnesses, and ordered extensive lab tests and diagnostic procedures. Blood work revealed a critical finding. Hannah's blood lead level was about 80 micrograms per deciliter. For comparison, anything above 10 is medically concerning. Her level posed an immediate, life-threatening risk. Additional tests showed signs of internal organ distress, and she soon developed acute respiratory failure. Doctors placed her on a ventilator to support her breathing. Imaging scans revealed fine, metallic-like particles throughout her tissues. Lead deposits accumulated over time from ongoing exposure rather than a single event. This chronic exposure explained her gradual symptoms and the sudden crisis. Once her condition became critical, her health declined so quickly that doctors induced a medical coma to reduce physiological stress and prevent permanent damage. Treatment began immediately with chelation therapy to bind and remove the lead. Progress was slow and required continuous monitoring. Hannah remained hospitalized for nearly 2 months. During that time, the team stabilized her breathing, improved her vital signs, and lowered her blood lead levels. Still, the damage from prolonged exposure was evident, and full recovery was unlikely. Doctors emphasized that even a 1-day delay might have been fatal. Hannah's survival ultimately hinged on her mother's decision to act, breaking from the family's usual pattern and enabling a timely diagnosis and urgent treatment. Once the diagnosis was confirmed, the hospital notified the Morgan County Department of Human Resources, which then alerted state investigators in Alabama. Specialists in toxic metal exposure took the case. Their first step was to test Hannah's family home for environmental sources of lead. They began in the kitchen and bathrooms, collecting water samples from every faucet and removing filters for analysis. They documented the condition of the plumbing and dishware used for food and drinks. Investigators also collected paint chips from older surfaces, dust samples, and soil from outside. They reviewed pantry items, including foods and nutritional products given to the children. Brian cooperated, pointing out the vitamin supplements Hannah had been taking from his clinic. He also suggested fast food as a possible source of exposure. Investigators documented his comments, but quickly ruled out that theory. With a blood lead level near 80 micrograms per deciliter, other cases would likely have appeared, yet no similar local incidents were reported. Furthermore, Brian and their other children showed no signs of lead exposure, undermining the idea of common environmental source. Initial lab tests of the home's water, paint, dust, pantry items, and nutritional products showed no hazardous lead levels or notable abnormalities. At this point, investigators had found no typical household source of contamination. They recommended testing for all household members. Brian reported that his son and daughter's results were normal and said he would complete his own testing later at a separate facility. His delay raised concerns, especially since some tests could have been done immediately on site. This was flagged for follow-up. A second home inspection occurred a few days later, with experts from the Alabama Department of Public Health expanding the scope of testing. They collected water from initial flow and post-flush samples, gathered dust from multiple surfaces, inspected filters, and took swabs from the kitchen's sink, kettle, and blender to check for metal leaching. Investigators also requested packaging from the vitamins and powder mixes to identify the manufacturer and batch numbers. The second round of results reinforced the initial findings. There was no source of lead in the home environment. However, the source and composition of Hannah's supplements remained unclear because the investigators did not have access to actual samples. They began to reconstruct Hannah's daily routine by talking to her family and close contacts. They focused on who prepared the meals, and especially the timing, location, frequency, and context in which Hannah took the supplements. The family reported that Brian regularly reminded Hannah to take them in the evening. At home, with a glass of water he left by her bed. These details supported a working theory of intentional oral exposure. The initial stages of the investigation revealed three main findings. There was no evidence of lead contamination in the home environment. The hypothesis of exposure through eating at restaurants was not supported by any definitive data. Further consideration of factors related to dietary supplement use, particularly Brian's direct role, warranted further scrutiny. As a result, investigators shifted their attention to Brian, verifying his statements and checking whether he had access to lead outside the home. After Hannah was hospitalized, Brian arrived at the hospital, claiming he had performed a self-exam. He said he used X-ray equipment at his own clinic and believed he saw a foreign substance in his body that could be lead. This claim puzzled the medical team. Self-diagnosing with X-rays is highly unorthodox, and using clinic equipment for personal testing is not standard practice. Physicians insisted he undergo a full, independent evaluation. When Brian realized the hospital would conduct the tests, he became visibly anxious. Screening confirmed the presence of lead in his system, but only at a low level, consistent with very recent exposure, too low to cause symptoms and not indicative of long-term accumulation. This is in stark contrast to Hannah's results, which showed clear evidence of prolonged exposure at high levels over several months. Experts concluded that Brian had likely ingested lead shortly before coming to the hospital to present himself as a fellow victim. This may have been an attempt to appear proactive and concerned, but the exposure timeline did not match and undermined his story. Interviews with colleagues and acquaintances further showed that Brian exhibited no symptoms of chronic lead exposure throughout Hannah's illness. His behavior and physical condition remained normal. To investigators, this strongly suggested Hannah's poisoning was not accidental. The pattern pointed to deliberate poisoning with no apparent risk to other family members. Brian's attempt to cast himself as a victim only deepened suspicion. Authorities believed he was trying to divert attention from the central issue, how lead had been entering Hannah's body over an extended period. In summer 2022, a contractor who had worked for Brian the previous year contacted investigators. He reported that in 2021, he had installed an X-ray room at Brian's clinic, lining the walls with lead sheets. After completion, leftover lead sheets and scraps remained. According to the contractor, Brian asked that the unused pieces be left behind, saying he would handle them. At the time, this seemed routine. Brian owned the clinic and had paid for the materials, but after learning of Hannah's diagnosis, the contractor reconsidered. He gave an official statement to police. Investigators compared his account with Hannah's medical timeline and found a match. Her symptoms worsened markedly in August 2021. Shortly after the clinic renovation was completed, the dates aligned, Brian gained access to lead just before Hannah's prolonged illness began. This gave investigators a documented external source of the toxic metal separate from the family's home. The contractor on the clinic project provided a detailed timeline from start to final cleanup. He explained standard procedures. Leftover materials are either returned to the warehouse or disposed of safely. He did not see what Brian did with the remaining lead. He simply handed it to him at the clinic owner's request. Investigators obtained the service agreement, start and completion dates, and a full materials list, confirming both the timing and presence of lead-based shielding. Clinic staff reported that only Brian had keys to the X-ray room and that the post-installation cleanup occurred without the contractor. This timeline became central. In 2021, Brian had access to a real source of lead. While the contractor's statement did not explain how the lead was administered, it established where it came from and supported the theory of intentional exposure. As the investigation progressed, another key detail emerged. Hannah had multiple life insurance policies totaling about $3 million. All policies named Brian as policyholder and sole beneficiary. Because they were spread across several insurers, they were harder to detect and obscured the overall coverage. The first policy was taken out in 2020, and Hannah likely knew about it. In 2021, around the time her health declined, additional policies were added. Attempts to increase coverage by another $5 million were denied when applications were rejected. The timing of these expansions, coinciding with Hannah's worsening condition, strengthened the case for intent. The health questionnaires required for approval were especially important. They demanded proof of good health, and significant weight loss could trigger denial. According to Hannah, Brian pressured her to wear weighted ankle bands during weigh-ins to conceal her weight loss and make her appear stable, benefiting the applications. During medical consultations, Brian seemed more focused on policy limits and conditions than on diagnosis or treatment. Staff noted he repeatedly raised insurance technicalities as a priority. Hannah's insurance forms carried electronic signatures, which later became disputed. The defense claimed Hannah was aware and involved. She denied this, saying Brian had access to some of her digital accounts. Investigators focused less on the specific content of the forms and more on the broader questions: who initiated the applications, who stood to benefit, and how medical documentation was tailored to fit policy requirements. A review of the family's coverage revealed a red flag. Brian, the primary earner, had a relatively modest policy, while Hannah, who contributed less financially, was insured for far larger amounts. Typically, higher earners carry higher coverage. This discrepancy suggested potential financial misconduct and pointed to a clear motive. Hannah's death would have yielded substantial payouts to Brian. By trial, both sides had firm positions. The prosecution argued that Brian deliberately poisoned Hannah with lead to collect insurance benefits, supported by medical data, a detailed timeline, and extensive financial records. The defense tried to undermine the evidence, citing procedural issues. They emphasized that there was no direct proof of how the lead entered Hannah's system and urged the court to reject circumstantial evidence without definitive proof of the method of poisoning. Court proceedings began in June 2025 on an expedited schedule. The defense concentrated on the collection and storage of biological samples, noting that urine was sometimes collected in non-standard containers and handled outside proper laboratory conditions. They also emphasized two gaps: the incomplete chemical comparison between the lead found in Brian's clinic and the lead detected in Hannah's body, and the absence of the original supplement containers. The defense proposed alternative explanations, including accidental exposure. After hearing both sides, the court ruled the medical and procedural evidence admissible. It acknowledged procedural flaws that could affect how jurors weighed the evidence, but found they did not make it invalid. When witness testimony ended, the defense called no witnesses, arguing the prosecution bore the burden of proof. In closing, the prosecution presented a timeline. Brian obtained access to lead in 2021. Hannah's health declined soon after. No lead sources were found in the home. The theory of shared environmental exposure was weakened because no other household members showed contamination. The prosecution cited financial motive, insurance policies, and attempts to increase coverage, and medical analysis that refuted Brian's claim that he himself had been poisoned. The defense maintained that the evidence was circumstantial and lacked direct proof of how lead entered Hannah's system. After several hours of deliberation, the jury found Brian Mann guilty of attempted murder. The court ordered Brian held without bail, pending sentencing, and scheduled a trial for early August 2025. The judge outlined potential penalties, including life in prison, depending on the extent of harm to Hannah and the level of planning. At the August hearing, with Brian Mann already convicted of attempted murder using toxic substances, the prosecution sought the maximum sentence. They argued his actions were not a brief lapse, but a calculated, multi-stage effort over several months. During this period, he hid Hannah's worsening condition from medical providers, delayed her diagnosis, and promoted a false narrative of a shared household source. The defense asked the court to avoid a life sentence, citing Brian's clean record, community standing, medical career, prior support for his family, Hannah's survival and ongoing treatment, and lingering uncertainty about his intent. In explaining its decision, the court found that the full body of evidence, medical records, financial documents, witness testimony, and investigative findings showed the deliberate conduct. The judge described the crimes as prolonged, causing irreparable harm, with lifelong consequences for Hannah. Brian Mann was sentenced to 25 years in state prison, with no parole eligibility for the first 20 years. The court also ordered restitution for Hannah's medical costs and emotional damages, with the amount to be set in a separate civil proceeding. The sentence did not restore Hannah's former life. Although her condition stabilized, the effects of severe lead poisoning were irreversible. Doctors reported lasting neurological impairments, chronic pain, persistent fatigue, and a need for lifelong blood monitoring. Some motor function returned, but she still required a wheelchair for long distances. Hannah's son and daughter were placed in the care of her relatives. The case drew a strong public response. Former patients of Brian's clinic were shocked and confused by the verdict. Shortly after his arrest, the clinic was closed. Authorities seized all medical equipment, including the X-ray machine, for forensic analysis. Brian's medical license was revoked, and the building was later put up for sale. Insurance companies tied to the case launched internal audits of policies associated with Brian. They introduced new risk assessment measures, such as stricter verification of medical information for high-value policies. For law enforcement, the case set a precedent. Toxicological evidence can establish intent even without recovering the substance's delivery method. Investigators emphasized that indirect evidence, backed by expert analysis and consistent witness testimony, was pivotal in securing the conviction. Hannah publicly thanked the medical team, investigators, and witnesses, saying their efforts likely saved her life. She did not discuss future plans, focusing instead on healing and caring for her son and daughter. The house, once filled with laughter, was now suffocating in a deadly silence. Coming home from school, Carmen could never have imagined that just a few steps through the door would shatter her entire world. On the bedroom floor, in the cold and narrow space, her 16-year-old daughter, Maria Jesus Troncoso, lay bound and barely breathing. With the last of her strength, Maria whispered a single word, the name of her attacker, Jorge. That final breath did more than break a mother's heart. It ignited a nightmare that spread through the city of Los Angeles, Chile. A murder that shocked the nation, a killer hiding in plain sight, and a question that lingers to this day. How could a girl so full of light and dreams meet such a cruel end? Maria Jesus Troncoso was born on May 22, 2007, in Los Angeles, Chile. She was the younger of two daughters of Carmen Gloria. Her arrival filled the home with joy. Family members celebrated enthusiastically, and her older sister, Camila, was especially excited to welcome her. A few months later, that happiness was overshadowed by her parents' separation. The breakup brought emotional strain and financial difficulties. Even so, Carmen found the strength to carry on, relying on her job as a teacher to support her daughters. Those tough years strengthened their bond, turning them into a united team that faced every challenge together. Over time, sisters Maria and Camila grew closer, sharing interests and hobbies. Together with their mother, they formed an inseparable trio. They often went shopping, watched movies at the cinema, attended concerts, and went on hiking trips. Their connection was more than family. It was a partnership built on love and support. In 2023, their routine changed slightly when Camila moved to another city to study occupational therapy. Though it was only 2 hours away, she couldn't be home during the week. However, every weekend, she returns to Los Angeles to spend time with her mother and younger sister Maria. At 16, Maria was in secondary school. She stood out for her strong academic performance, kindness, involvement in extracurriculars, and eagerness to help others. She had a natural instinct to protect those in need. She often rescued abandoned animals, cared for them, and found people to adopt them. She also joined feminist marches, defending women's rights and speaking out against gender-based violence. Cheerful, outgoing, and affectionate, she was admired for her compassion. On the weekend of October 14 to 15, 2023, Camila visited as usual. She spends time with her family and shares moments with her younger sister Maria. During those days, Maria asked for advice about what to do after finishing school. She was unsure about her career path and even considered following Camila into occupational therapy. It was a conversation like many they'd had before, without knowing it would be their last. The next day, Maria began to complain of stomach pain. The discomfort continued through Tuesday, and by Wednesday evening, she told her mother she didn't want to go to school on Thursday because she felt too unwell and needed to rest. Her mother, Carmen, agreed. Her daughter looked tired and pale. She hoped a day of rest would help. On Thursday morning, October 19, Carmen left for work at 7:30 a.m., going to the school where she taught, about a half-hour drive from their apartment. Maria was still asleep, so they didn't say goodbye. Around 8:30 a.m., Carmen received a text message from Maria asking for money, about $200, to buy clothes for an upcoming school event. The request immediately made her suspicious. Her daughter rarely asked for money for such things, and even asked for it to be transferred immediately. Concerned, Carmen started a video call. What she saw unsettled her. Maria didn't fully show her face, and the camera moved as if someone else were holding it. Her behavior felt off, and when the conversation returned to money, Carmen grew more worried. Carmen explained she didn't have the money at that moment, but Maria insisted she take it from the condominium funds. At the time, Carmen was the treasurer of the residential complex and had access to that account. The insistence and unusual tone deepened her unease. For Carmen, the suggestion to use condominium funds was the final red flag. Her daughter didn't know the balance of that account. and it was unthinkable that she would propose taking money that wasn't theirs. That request was completely contrary to Maria's character and went against the values Carmen had instilled in her daughters. The uneasiness in Carmen's heart kept growing. Trusting her instincts, she asked to leave her school duties and drove straight home. As soon as she walked in, the house felt unnaturally silent. She ran upstairs to the main bedroom, where Maria had spent the morning, opened the door, and was confronted with a devastating scene. Her daughter lay on the floor, wrapped in a blanket between the bed and the nightstand. In a panic, Carmen ran to Maria and found her daughter's hands tied behind her back and her ankles bound. Desperate, she began untying her and shouted for help. Maria was still breathing, but with difficulty, her chest rising and falling unevenly. In her final moments of consciousness, Maria whispered one word, identifying her attacker, Jorge. She then asked her mother to hold her. Carmen's cries for help echoed through the building, but almost no one responded. Only relatives of a man named Jorge Reboledo Martinez, who stayed at a nearby aunt's house, came forward. They were the ones who ultimately called emergency services. Shortly after, Jorge himself arrived, approaching calmly, asking what was happening, and offering help. Carmen, in shock and focused on saving her daughter, did not grasp the importance of the name her child had uttered. Paramedics arrived within minutes and tried to resuscitate Maria for more than half an hour, but they could not save her. Maria, 16, was pronounced dead at the scene. Carabineros officers arrived soon after, secured the area, and began collecting evidence. One fact was clear: Maria had been attacked in her own home. The attacker had either forced entry or been allowed in by someone she trusted. Carmen gave a detailed statement. She explained why her daughter had stayed home, described the strange call and messages, and repeated her daughter's final word. Her initial testimony quickly became a key part of the investigation. Police turned their attention to the man identified as Jorge. Investigators soon learned that Jorge was not a permanent resident. He occasionally stayed in the building with relatives. As they dug deeper, they uncovered his extensive criminal history. He was far from an ordinary neighbor. Shockingly, Jorge had once served in the Carabineros, but was dismissed in 2014 after being arrested by his own colleagues for multiple offenses. In the days after the murder, he was initially questioned as a witness. During interrogation, however, he confessed he had killed Maria. With his confession, he was immediately arrested and placed in preventive detention while the investigation advanced. A deeper review of his past revealed a pattern of violence and crime, convincing investigators that the tragedy in Los Angeles was not an isolated act, but part of long-standing, unchecked behavior. His record included arrests for simple assault, robbery with intimidation, and violent robbery. An officer involved in his previous arrest shared disturbing details. Most of his victims were women, and during a search of his room, police found several women's underwear among his belongings. He had been sentenced to 5 years and 1 day in prison from August 29, 2015 to August 23, 2019, but secured early release in March 2019. Even more troubling, he later managed to erase his criminal record, leaving no official trace of his convictions. After his release, he maintained what authorities called an irreproachable conduct record, a technicality that allowed him to avoid scrutiny from neighbors and community leaders. In his initial statement about Maria's murder, Jorge gave a chilling account. On the morning of October 19, 2023, he entered through the front door, went straight to the kitchen to take a knife, and then headed upstairs to the main bedroom. There he encounters 16 years old Maria, shocked and terrified. Maria froze when she saw him. He threatened her with the knife and demanded money. Maria gave Jorge everything she had, 20,000 Chilean pesos in cash, about $20. Jorge said it wasn't enough. When she insisted she had no more, he tied her hands and feet and forced her to call her mother to demand additional money. Because Maria couldn't hold the phone, Jorge held it for her. That explains why, during the video call, Carmen couldn't clearly see her daughter's face and why the camera moved oddly. When Carmen refused to send money, Jorge became enraged. He ended the call and attacked Maria with such brutality that her injuries proved fatal. Realizing she was dying, he took the cash, a gold ring, and her phone. He later confessed to throwing the knife into a nearby river to destroy evidence. Divers recovered a knife, matching the description, which was sent to the forensic lab for analysis and comparison with Maria's wounds. For her family, the loss was devastating. On Friday, October 27, relatives, classmates, friends, teachers, and even strangers gathered to say goodbye. The funeral was filled with grief and a collective demand for justice. Her sister, Camila, emerged as a leading voice for accountability. She questioned how an alleged robbery could end in such a cruel killing. After his arrest, Jorge cooperated with investigators, handing over the clothes he wore that day and providing biological samples for comparison with evidence from the crime scene. Jorge was formally charged with robbery with homicide, and a court ordered his preventive detention during the ongoing investigation. Authorities set a 5-month investigation period, with a hearing scheduled for March 2024. Meanwhile, Maria's friends launched an online campaign calling for the harshest penalty, life imprisonment without parole or early release. The campaign gained traction, fueled by public anger over perceived failures in the justice system. Many asked, if this was only a robbery, why murder a teenager so mercilessly? Investigators did not rule out that Jorge had been watching the family's home. It was known in the neighborhood that only women lived there, which may have made them seem like an easy target. On November 3, 2023, the first march demanding justice for Maria took place, organized by her family. It was the start of a series of demonstrations over the following months, all echoing the same message: justice delayed is justice denied. After Jorge's arrest, the legal process became a nightmare for Maria's family. Progress was far slower than they expected. The March hearing never happened. Delay tactics by the defense pushed the first hearing to June 26, forcing the family to wait months just to begin the trial. Camila keeps the memory of her younger sister Maria alive through social media posts, interviews, and constant participation in protests. Each month, on the anniversary of the murder, she shared tributes and raised awareness. Her goal was clear: to secure a life sentence for the man who shattered their family. On May 22, 2024, the family marked what would have been Marie's 17th birthday, a painful day used to honor her kindness, solidarity, and compassion. Around that time, a mural was painted in her memory during a public event, turning her legacy into a symbol of resilience for the community. Meanwhile, the judicial process continued to move slowly. At a hearing to review precautionary measures, the judge maintained Jorge's preventive detention. The prosecutor's office requested 15 more days to complete the investigation, another delay that tested the family's endurance. During that session, Maria's relatives and friends gathered outside the courthouse with banners demanding justice. In August 2024, the lead prosecutor announced that the state would seek the maximum penalty under Chilean law, qualified life imprisonment, which would keep Jorge in prison without the possibility of early release. The prosecution also disclosed its case plan: 30 witnesses, both civilians and police, and 6 forensic experts would testify to reconstruct the events. As the months passed, preparations advanced for the oral trial. scheduled to begin on December 26, 2024. Just as the family felt close to confronting Jorge in court, another setback occurred. The December 26 hearing was postponed to January 6, 2025. Again, at the defense's request. For Camila and her mother, the delay was unbearable. After more than 10 months of emotional preparation to face the man responsible for Maria's death, they were told to wait yet again. Camila spoke publicly, condemning what she saw as a defense strategy indifferent to their suffering. For her and her mother, each delay was not merely legal maneuvering, it prolonged their pain and reinforced the feeling that justice remained out of reach. Throughout the process, Maria's family sought not only justice in her case, but also broader reforms. They supported legislative proposals to impose harsher penalties on violent offenders. Lawmakers even began drafting the Maria Jesus Troncoso Law, inspired by her case. The bill aimed to strengthen punishments and prevent offenders from obtaining early release or sentence reductions. As Jorge had previously done, it also sought tougher penalties for non-intimate femicides, cases in which a man murders a woman with whom he has no romantic, familial, or cohabiting relationship. Maria and Jorge had no prior connection, and her death exposed a legal gap that many felt left women unprotected. Advocates argued that existing penalties were too lenient, and the proposed law aimed to fix that. By September 2025, the bill's passage in Congress was still uncertain. Meanwhile, the long-awaited trial began on January 6, 2025. Over 10 days, the tribunal heard from 33 witnesses, reviewed forensic analyses, and examined the evidence gathered by prosecutors. Key evidence included Maria's personal belongings recovered from Jorge's home, and DNA found on his clothing that matched her genetic profile. Additional evidence came from geolocation data linked to Maria's cell phone, reported missing by Carmen, and later found in Jorge's possession. Surveillance footage placed him near the residence. Most damaging was his own confession. The defense tried to exclude it, claiming constitutional violations, but the court ruled the confession valid. The defense also tried to downgrade the charges to simple robbery, with violence followed by homicide. The tribunal rejected that argument, concluding the murder occurred during the robbery itself. The crime was therefore classified as robbery with homicide. After more than 15 months of waiting, the court delivered its verdict. Jorge Rebolledo Martinez was sentenced to qualified life imprisonment. This sentence requires at least 40 years in prison before he becomes eligible for any form of release. With no alternative sentences or early benefits, he was also permanently barred from holding public office or any official role and lost his political rights for life. For Carmen, the sentence could not heal the wound. She acknowledged that no ruling could bring back her daughter or erase the pain. Still, the decision offered a measure of relief, a formal recognition that justice had finally been served. The murder of Maria left a profound mark on her family and the community. Her case resonated far beyond Los Angeles, Chile, as a stark reminder of the dangers women continue to face and the urgent need for stronger protections. Just before dawn, while the world still slept, the sound of a single engine broke the calm near the Foix Reservoir. Moments later, the night exploded into chaos. Flames devoured the vehicle, and thick smoke rose into the sky like a desperate plea for help. When firefighters arrived, they expected a routine car fire. Instead, they found a horror, a body, burned beyond recognition, locked inside the trunk. This wasn't an accident. Someone hadn't just tried to destroy a car, they'd tried to erase a person. The victim was a police officer, once sworn to protect others, now reduced to ashes by someone he trusted. Who could commit such a calculated, merciless act? As investigators retraced his final hours, a chilling story began to unfold. a tale of love turned toxic, jealousy that spiraled into rage, and a secret pact destined to destroy lives. This was no random crime. It was a personal betrayal of the deepest kind, one that would shake Spain and expose how far people will go to keep their lies hidden. Once you step into this story, you may never see love the same way again. Pedro Rodriguez was born in Barcelona into a troubled family. His relationship with his father and sister was distant, leaving him emotionally close only to his mother and his brother, Juan Antonio. After their mother's death, Juan became Pedro's most important spiritual and emotional support. From a young age, Pedro was passionate about motorcycles and sports. He was healthy, active, and strong-willed, and chose to pursue a career that suited his love of movement and discipline. In 2008, he joined the traffic division of the Guardia Urbana, the police force responsible for law enforcement within Barcelona. His brother followed a similar path, training to become a police officer as well. In Spain, the Guardia Urbana handles work in the city of Barcelona, while the national police cover other areas. In 2014, Pedro married Patricia and had a son, but the marriage did not last. Over the next few years, Patricia noticed a change in Pedro. He became cold, distant, and rumored to be having an affair. Friends told her they had seen him with another woman, who had 2 daughters. The couple's arguments became constant, and by 2016, Pedro asked for a divorce. He denied having another relationship, but soon after, he moved to another town to live with Rosa Peral. She is also an officer in the Metropolitan Police and has 2 children from a previous marriage. On May 4, 2017, Pedro's car and body were discovered burned near the Foix River Reservoir. Investigators confirmed Pedro's identity using forensic equipment, and some of his work items were found in the trunk. The speed and thoroughness of the crime made finding evidence extremely difficult. After confirming Pedro's death, investigators contacted his ex-wife Patricia. She stated that she and Pedro had separated long before, and that he was living with a co-worker from the police force. Investigators soon discovered that Pedro had been temporarily suspended from duty after assaulting a man who had ignored a traffic checkpoint, an incident captured on video. Rosa, meanwhile, was on medical leave at the time due to depression. When questioned, Rosa said the last time she saw Pedro, they argued and he left the house. She claimed he often disappeared for several days after their fights and had a volatile temper. When the police informed Rosa that Pedro was dead, her reaction was surprisingly calm. She refused to come to the police station, saying she couldn't leave her daughters alone, but agreed to go the next day. From that point onward, suspicion began to fall on her. On May 5th, Rosa gave her first official statement, suggesting that the mafia might be responsible for Pedro's death, an explanation investigators found unfounded. In a later statement, she admitted that she and Pedro had been together for about 8 months. Rosa said that 2 days before his death, they argued about Pedro's jealousy toward her ex-husband. She claimed he left afterward, but later sent her a message apologizing and professing his love. According to her, their relationship often followed this pattern of jealousy, arguments, silence, and reconciliation. For that reason, she said she wasn't immediately worried when he disappeared for 2 days. However, her story only portrayed Pedro as impulsive and possessive without helping investigators find the truth. A few days after Pedro's funeral, Rosa returned to the police station and accused her ex-husband, Ruben, of the murder. She described him as controlling and jealous, implying he might have killed Pedro out of rage. When questioned, Ruben acknowledged that their marriage had been full of arguments, but said his jealousy had been justified. Rosa, he claimed, had been unfaithful several times, first with a co-worker named Albert and later with Pedro. He claimed that he was no longer interested in her relationships and had never confronted her partner. Ruben had an alibi because he was at work at the time of the murder, a claim confirmed by his colleagues and superiors. With Ruben cleared, investigators turned their attention back to Rosa and to the other man in her life, Albert Lopez. Rosa Peral was born on March 27, 1981, in Barcelona. Her father, Francisco Paco Peral, was well known among those close to her. Her mother had recently passed away due to complications from surgery. Rosa met Ruben when they were very young. Their first daughter was born in 2010, and 2 years later, they married and had a second child. However, Rosa's personal life was far from stable. According to Ruben, Rosa began an affair with her colleague, Albert Lopez, while they both worked for the Guardia Urbana. Their relationship started in 2012, when they were assigned to patrol together. By 2013, just a year after her second daughter was born, she and Albert were secretly dating. Even after separating from Ruben and beginning a relationship with Pedro, Rosa continued to see Albert in secret. He remained her lover through 2 consecutive relationships. During their marriage, Ruben often tried to ignore Rosa's infidelities, but certain situations made this impossible, like when she attended police events with Albert, behaving as if they were a couple while still married. Eventually, Ruben had enough and decided to separate from her. Despite their long affair, Rosa and Albert never made their relationship official. She wanted commitment, but he refused. Albert didn't want children or the responsibility of being a stepfather to Rosa's daughters. Around this time, Rosa began dating Pedro. Unlike Albert, Pedro wanted a serious relationship and cared deeply for her and her children. Still, Albert couldn't let go. Although he started dating other women, his obsession with Rosa continued. He eventually reached out to her again, and they began meeting in secret, setting the stage for a tragic series of events that would later shock Spain. Albert had no idea that Rosa was now living with and engaged to Pedro. Albert believed Rosa was single, just casually seeing him. When he discovered she was actually with Pedro, he was enraged. Feeling betrayed, he distanced himself and tried to move on, posting photos on social media of vacations, parties, and nights out with other women. Despite this, he soon reached out to Rosa again, and they resumed their affair in secret. In April 2017, Albert proposed to Rosa in an unexpected and unusual way. One afternoon, while Rosa was relaxing on the terrace with her friends, Albert suddenly showed up, tossed a small box to her, and told her to guess what was inside. The box contained a ring. His approach was more spontaneous than romantic, yet it reflected his complicated emotions. Even though Rosa told her friends that she was engaged to Pedro, she still did not refuse Albert's gift. She accepted the ring, took intimate photos wearing it, and sent them to him. Later, her friends were stunned to see a photo where she wore 2 engagement rings, Pedro's on one hand and Albert's on the other. Rosa's friends, aware of her double life, often asked who she would ultimately choose. Her response was blunt. She preferred Pedro because he dressed better and was better in bed. Eventually, Pedro discovered romantic messages between Rosa and Albert, and their lives began to unravel. During the investigation that followed, police reviewed both Rosa's and Albert's professional records. Rosa's file showed no record of violence, but did include a troubling incident from her early career. When she was 23, her email was hacked and her nude photos were sent to all her colleagues. More than a year later, she filed a complaint against a deputy inspector. However, the deputy inspector's lawyer argued that during that time, Rosa remained intimate with him and several other police officers. Even though she was married, Albert, meanwhile, had a more serious record. In August 2014, he was allegedly involved in the death of a street vendor. That day, Rosa was patrolling with Albert and another officer when they stopped the vendor during a police check. The man became aggressive, stabbing Rosa and hitting her in the head before running off. Albert chased him, and moments later, the vendor fell down a steep slope. He was taken to a hospital, where he later died from his injuries. Albert claimed it was an accident, that the man had simply slipped, but investigators were not fully convinced. Because Albert was known for being shorter-tempered and aggressive, they suspected he might have pushed the man. However, with no solid evidence, the case was ruled an accident. Years later, during the investigation into Pedro's murder, Albert's violent past came up again. Detectives examined the phones of Rosa and Albert, checking their messages, calls, and GPS data from around the time of the crime. What they found was deeply troubling. On May 1, 2017, the location data from Pedro's, Rosa's, and Albert's phones placed all three at the same location, Rosa and Pedro's home. That same night, Rosa and Albert spoke by phone, and 4 hours later, Albert made a short call from a prepaid number before arriving at the house around 2:00 a.m. The next day, May 2, their phones again showed them in the same area, this time near the home of Rosa's ex-husband, Ruben. Investigators later found Pedro's burned car and body in that same area. The coincidence initially made Ruben a suspect, but his phone data proved he was nowhere near the scene. Confirming his alibi, a friend of Rosa's then revealed something even more disturbing. Just 2 days after Pedro's burned body was discovered, Rosa hosted a dinner at her home. The friend, her partner, and Albert all attended. Everyone acted as if nothing had happened, showing no sign of distress. Even worse, Rosa and Albert behaved affectionately, like a couple. Later, a colleague testified that Rosa had confided in him after the dinner, admitting she was afraid of Albert. Around the same time, one of Pedro's close friends, Javier, refused to represent Rosa when she sought his help. He was already assisting Pedro's family and could not represent someone who was a suspect in the same case. As pressure grew, Rosa returned to the police station and changed her story. This time, instead of blaming Ruben, she blamed Albert Lopez, her former lover, secret partner, and alleged accomplice. The change puzzled investigators. If Rosa truly believed Albert had killed Pedro, why would she dine with him instead of going directly to the police? The only detail that supported her claim was that she had once said she feared Albert, but investigators suspected she might have used that statement to strengthen her defense. Eventually, police arrested both Rosa and Albert and searched their homes. Albert's apartment appeared normal, but his car stood out. It was unnaturally spotless and reeked of air freshener, cleaners, and gasoline. At Rosa's house, luminol tests detected faint blood traces on walls, towels, and various items. Investigators also noticed freshly painted areas, missing furniture, and a redecorated room, suggesting an attempt to hide evidence. Inside a wardrobe, they discovered Pedro's police badge, ID card, and phone. It was normal for Pedro's belongings to be in the house where he lived with her. But what caught the police's attention was that there were messages sent from this phone after the day Pedro was supposed to have died. May 2. It was clear that someone was impersonating him. Forensic evidence indicates that Pedro was killed between 3 and 6:00 a.m. On May 2, that morning, the GPS data from the phones of Rosa, Albert, and Pedro all placed them at Rosa and Albert's home. Later the same day, their phones were detected again near Ruben's house, the same area where Pedro's burned car was eventually discovered. 2 days later, when police went to speak with Rosa for the first time, she refused to let them in, claiming her daughters were asleep. She also showed officers A WhatsApp conversation, she said, was with Pedro. Messages that investigators later confirmed had been sent after he was already dead. When police eventually brought Rosa and Albert in for questioning, they used an interview method designed to reveal inconsistencies. Each time one of them made a statement, officers repeated it to the other to observe their reactions. As expected, the two began blaming each other, Rosa blaming Albert and Albert blaming Rosa. It became clear that one or both of them were lying. In 2018, new testimony surfaced. A neighbor who had been secretly romantically involved with Rosa told police that on the night of May 2nd, he messaged her about hearing a chainsaw coming from her house. He admitted he hadn't reported this earlier because he didn't want to expose their affair. He also revealed that Rosa often called him over when Pedro was angry and left home, implying their meetings happened when Pedro was away. Investigators searched for the chainsaw but never found it. By February 2020, 3 years after the crime, the long-awaited trial began. It became one of Spain's most closely followed cases, full of sensational details and shocking revelations. On the stand, Rosa claimed Albert was the one who killed Pedro. She said that early on May 2nd, Albert came to her house, grabbed an axe, and attacked Pedro while she ran upstairs to protect her daughters. She portrayed herself as a victim, saying Albert was violent and had even hit her before during police duties. According to her, Albert forced her to clean the crime scene afterward, threatening her if she refused. Albert told a very different story. He claimed that when he arrived, Pedro was already dead, and Rosa asked him to help dispose of the body. He said Rosa manipulated him, wanting to frame her ex-husband, Ruben. That, he said, was why they drove to Ruben's neighborhood to burn Pedro's car. In admitting this, Albert confessed to helping cover up the crime. One of the most disturbing testimonies came from Antonia, the stepmother of Rosa's daughters. Antonia testified in court that the girls saw Rosa covered in blood, leading Pedro down the stairs that night. They described Pedro as disoriented, walking like a robot, possibly drugged. Investigators believe Pedro was sedated with medication he took for sciatica, pills missing from the house. Later, one of Rosa's former inmates testified that Rosa had privately confessed to dissolving Pedro's medication in water after a heated argument so he would calm down. Once he was incapacitated, she and Albert killed him. That night, Rosa and Albert left separately, Rosa in her car, Albert driving Pedro's. They went to the Foix reservoir, where they set fire to Pedro's car with his body inside. Investigators concluded that Rosa and Albert's motives were twofold. They wanted to remove Pedro so they could continue their affair freely, and they hoped to frame Rosa's ex-husband, Ruben, with whom she was fighting over custody of her daughters, but their plan failed. Prosecutors sought 25 years in prison for Rosa and 24 for Albert, arguing that they had drugged Pedro before killing him. The case showed clear evidence of premeditation and cruelty. In 2021, the court delivered its verdict. Both Rosa Peral and Albert Lopez were found guilty of Pedro Rodriguez's murder and ordered to pay nearly 885,000 euros compensation to Pedro's family. Rosa received a 25-year sentence for aggravated murder. Due to her intimate relationship with the victim, having been jailed since 2017, she had already served about 6 years at sentencing. Albert received a 20-year sentence and had been imprisoned for the same length of time. While in prison, Albert reportedly attended rehabilitation programs and showed remorse, acknowledging his role in the crime, a factor that might grant him limited privileges. Both Rosa and Albert appealed their convictions, but Spain's Supreme Court rejected their petitions. However, Albert's confession left a small chance for Rosa's case to be reviewed in the future. Even in prison, Rosa continued to draw public attention. Reports emerged about her alleged relationships with other inmates, both male and female. There were also renewed claims about Albert's possible involvement in the death of a street vendor known as El Bonato. A fellow inmate alleged that Rosa confessed Albert had killed the man, saying Albert told her afterward that he did it for her, that no one would ever harm her again. More recently, Rosa filed a $30 million lawsuit against Netflix over the series Burning Body, which portrayed her story. She argued that the show violated her daughter's privacy and damaged her reputation as a mother. However, since her ex-husband, Ruben, has legal custody of the children, only he has the right to pursue such a lawsuit. While in prison, Rosa gave interviews for the documentary The Tapes of Rosa Peral, where she continued to assert her innocence. She denied hiding assets from the court, explaining that she had only transferred money to her father to avoid seizure, not to conceal it. Today, Rosa's daughters, now teenagers aged 15 and 13, visit her regularly with their grandfather, who remains her most loyal supporter. He continues to believe firmly in her innocence. Rosa maintains that she was framed, insisting she loved Pedro and would never have harmed him. Still, the courts, investigators, and much of the Spanish public believe otherwise. Her father's steadfast belief in her innocence remains one of the few enduring expressions of loyalty in a story marked by deceit, betrayal, and irreversible tragedy. In Mexico, a 14-year-old girl tragically lost her life after undergoing a cosmetic surgery she never asked for. Her name was Paloma. Her story has deeply resonated across social media, sparking critical debates about ethics, medical responsibility, and the limits of aesthetic procedures, especially when performed on minors who lack the legal capacity to give consent. As surgery, common in a society focused on looks, has turned into a case involving alleged cover-ups, conflicts of interest, and decisions that drastically impacted a family. Paloma Nicole Arellano Escobedo was born on January 14, 2011, in Durango, Mexico. Her parents were Carlos Yasmin Arellano and Paloma Jasmine Escobedo. Jasmine also had an older son from a previous relationship. Paloma and her father, Carlos, had a very loving relationship. When Paloma was 4 years old, Carlos and Jasmine separated. From that moment on, Jasmine maintained shared custody, and Carlos remained an active presence in his daughter's life. According to Carlos, at first, his ex-wife strictly followed the visitation schedule set by the court, allowing him to see Paloma only on weekends. Over time, however, things became more flexible. Carlos began picking her up from school every day. Their daily routine was well established. Jasmine would collect Paloma at noon for lunch, take her to her extracurricular activities in the afternoon, and then Carlos would pick her up in the evening and take her home. During this period, rumors began circulating in town that their breakup had been caused by Jasmine's alleged affair with Dr. Victor Manuel Rosales. According to several accounts, when Victor's wife discovered the infidelity, she repeatedly confronted Carlos about it. Victor was a well-known figure in Durango. In addition to being a plastic surgeon, he was also the son of a former judicial official who had served as a judge in the Second Commercial Court of First Instance. Yet, a disturbing rumor had long shadowed his reputation, that years earlier, he had operated on his own mother, who allegedly died during the procedure. Jasmine and Victor soon made their relationship public, eventually moving in together. Victor became the stepfather to Paloma and her half-brother. Meanwhile, Paloma grew into a bright, cheerful, energetic teenager. She excelled academically, showed a natural talent for sports. In March 2025, she and her volleyball team won a school tournament, a victory that filled her with pride. Her intelligence, sense of responsibility and leadership skills led to her election as class president. Friends, teachers alike described her as confident, kind, always smiling. To her father, she was an exemplary daughter. Everyone in Durango seemed to adore her. By mid-2025, Paloma had one major dream: to celebrate her 15th birthday in grand style. Beyond the party, she often told her father she wanted to travel to Europe. As plans for her quinceañera progressed, with January 30th, 2026 set as the date, Carlos surprised her with a gift she would never forget: a trip abroad together. He told her she deserved it more than anyone. The trip was later rescheduled for mid-March 2026. Everything seemed perfect. But Jasmine, her mother, had another gift, one so unexpected, so irreversible, that it would ultimately change Paloma's life forever. On Thursday, September 11th, Carlos received a call from his ex-wife, Yasmin, who told him that Paloma's school had contacted her, reporting that their daughter was feeling unwell and showing symptoms consistent with global respiratory disease. She asked Carlos to pick her up, but because he was busy at work, he asked Jasmine to handle it instead. Jasmine took Paloma to a nearby clinic to determine whether she had it or something else. Later that day, she called Carlos again, saying that Paloma had tested positive, even sending him a photo of the test result as proof. Not long after, Jasmine contacted him once more. This time, she explained that she had decided to take Paloma to a remote house in the mountains for a few days, 3 or 4 at most, so she could isolate and avoid spreading the infection. She reassured Carlos that everything was fine, but warned him they would be out of contact because there was no phone signal in the area. Carlos accepted the explanation, never imagining the truth behind it. After the weekend, on Monday afternoon, September 15th, Jasmine called again, her voice tense and urgent. She told Carlos that Paloma had fallen seriously ill and had been hospitalized. Assuming they were still in the mountains, Carlos initially thought Paloma might have been bitten by an animal or had some kind of allergic reaction. Jasmine didn't offer many details, only telling him to come to the hospital immediately. When Carlos arrived, he found Jasmine standing outside the building. Desperate, he asked what had happened, but she said nothing. He demanded to see his daughter, but Jasmine warned that the doctors wouldn't allow it. Carlos ignored her. He told the staff at reception, and he was allowed to enter the intensive care unit. Inside, he was met with a sight that froze him in place. Paloma lay in an induced coma, intubated, her eyes swollen, her body disfigured and bloated beyond recognition. Shocked, Carlos could barely breathe. Doctors explained that Paloma had suffered cardiac arrest, cerebral edema, and that Paloma had undergone cosmetic surgery. Carlos was speechless. He had never authorized any procedure and had no idea such an operation had even been planned. Then, everything began to make sense. The fake global respiratory disease diagnosis, the sudden isolation, the lack of communication, it had all been a lie, carefully constructed to hide the truth. Doctors told him that Paloma had been admitted to the hospital on Saturday, September 13th, still alive, but in critical condition. Now, 2 days later, her situation was deteriorating fast. Her heart had stopped once. Her brain had been deprived of oxygen for too long. They were doing everything possible, but there was little hope. Carlos refused to leave her side. He spent every hour in the hospital, holding her hand, whispering to her, begging her to wake up. Outside, Jasmine and Victor, the surgeon and Jasmine's partner, remained distant, avoiding him completely. Days passed, but Paloma's condition didn't improve. The swelling in her brain was too severe, the damage irreversible. Finally, after multiple consultations, and desperate prayers, Carlos faced the hardest decision of his life. On September 20th, after doctors confirmed there was no brain activity, he agreed to disconnect the machines, keeping his daughter alive. At 2:35 p.m., surrounded only by her father and medical staff, Paloma Nicole Arellano Escobedo passed away. She was just 14 years old. The wake was held the next day. September 21st. Family members, classmates, teachers, and volleyball teammates came to say goodbye. In a gesture that Carlos would later describe as impossible to comprehend, Dr. Victor attended the funeral, silent, emotionless, offering neither an apology nor an explanation. On the same day, an autopsy was performed on Paloma's body. Even though it had already been handled by the funeral home, the preliminary report confirmed cerebral edema and lung damage consistent with surgical complications, but for Carlos, the nightmare was only beginning. He feared the influence, power that Dr. Victor wielded, both through his professional connections and his family's judicial background. His fears proved valid. That same Victor appeared at the prosecutor's office to give his statement, flanked by lawyers and a large private security detail. Witness described his demeanor as arrogant, entirely devoid of remorse. The forensic doctor who performed the autopsy confirmed not only that surgery had taken place, but also provided explicit details of the procedures: breast implants, abdominal liposuction, and a fat transfer to the buttocks. All of this, he testified, had been approved and signed for by Paloma's mother, whose signature appeared on the clinic's consent forms. Upon confirming that his suspicions were true, even more questions began to torment Carlos. Why had they hidden something so serious from him? And how could Victor have the audacity to attend his daughter's funeral, standing in silence as though nothing had happened? Of course, Carlos couldn't ignore the obvious. Being the son of a powerful family, Victor likely felt untouchable, shielded from any consequences his actions might bring. By then, authorities had begun to question the accuracy of Paloma's death certificate, suspecting that it had been intentionally falsified. Yet Carlos's worst fears seemed to come true when the president of the State Commission for the Protection Against Health Risks publicly stated that his office had no obligation to determine whether negligence had occurred. Even worse, he defended the clinic, claiming that it had complied with all medical, anesthetic, hospitalization protocols, and that the surgery had been performed with the proper consent of the legal representative. As the story spread through state and national media, public outrage exploded. News outlets denounced the negligence, the deception, and the complicity that seemed to run deep. Carlos, meanwhile, gave multiple interviews in which he firmly maintained that his daughter had never expressed any desire to undergo cosmetic surgery. Determined to fight for justice in Paloma's name, he began organizing protests, public demonstrations, demanding accountability from the authorities. Amid growing pressure, the state prosecutor, who had already met with Carlos several times, assured the public that the investigation would proceed without interference, corruption, or favoritism. She emphasized that no case would go to court until all expert analyses were completed, ensuring that those responsible would have no chance to escape justice. Soon after, the investigation unveiled even more disturbing truths. In an official statement, the prosecutor's office revealed that the global respiratory disease test, used as an excuse to isolate Paloma, was actually forged, a fake, created using a positive result from 2022. Further investigation confirmed that Jasmine and Victor had planned the surgery in secret, never informing or seeking consent from Paloma's biological father. They had built an elaborate deception. The school was told Paloma felt unwell, while the girl herself, under adult influence, went along with the story. The supposed trip to the mountains had been nothing but a cover-up to carry out the surgery. Records showed that the operation was performed on Saturday, September 12th, and by the following day, Paloma's condition had already begun to deteriorate. Then came the most shocking revelation of all. Jasmine had participated directly in her daughter's operation, despite having no medical training or credentials whatsoever. Investigators discovered her name listed in the surgery logbook as a nursing assistant, a role she was not licensed to perform. Even more horrifying, this was not the first time. Authorities uncovered that Jasmine had been involved in similar, unauthorized procedures before, even posting photos from the operating room to her social media accounts. As the evidence mounted, both Jasmine and Victor were arrested. She was charged with negligence, document falsification, and professional impersonation, while he faced accusations of medical malpractice, abandonment, and usurpation of parental authority for signing surgical consent forms as though he were Paloma's legal guardian. Following their formal indictment, neither spoke publicly about the case. However, it soon became known that both defendants had requested permission to await trial in freedom, a request the judge ultimately denied. They were ordered to remain in preventive detention as the investigation continued. The prosecutor's office announced that the investigation would extend for at least 3 months. Meanwhile, as public outrage grew and media coverage intensified, the Mexican Association of Plastic, Aesthetic, and Reconstructive Surgery broke its silence. In an official statement, the association confirmed that it had requested Dr. Victor Manuel Rosales' temporary suspension from his duties as a practicing member until the investigation concludes. In response, legislators from Durango, other states, even the federal Congress, proposed drafting what they called Nicole's Law, a reform aimed at tightening regulations and preventing such tragedies from ever happening again. For now, as the prosecutor's office continues to gather evidence and complete expert analyses, Jasmine and Victor remain in preventive detention. A final sentence is expected to be handed down in early 2026. But for Carlos, no verdict will ever be enough. No prison sentence can bring back his daughter, the girl who was about to turn 15, the volleyball champion, the class president, the child who dreamed of traveling to Europe with her father. The case of Paloma Nicole Arellano Escobedo has laid bare profound failures in medical regulation, parental responsibility, and the protection of minors. It has shown how easily the system can be manipulated when those involved possess connections and influence. It forces us to confront unsettling questions about the cosmetic surgery industry and obsession with beauty, about the ethics of performing medical procedures on minors, about informed consent, and who truly has the right to decide what happens to a child's body. Yet beyond all the legal arguments and proposed reforms, this remains the story of a young girl who lost her life in an operating room, subjected to procedures she never wanted. Authorized by those who should have protected her most, Paloma Nicole should be preparing for her 15th birthday in January 2026. She should be packing for her trip to Europe, playing volleyball with her team, and sharing that confident smile that everyone remembers. Instead, she is gone. Her father continues to fight, not only for her memory, but for every child who might face the same fate. The investigation continues, the trial awaits, and the world watches, hoping that this time, justice will triumph over privilege, truth over deceit. It was a winter evening near the end of the year. Inside the headquarters of an elite police unit, music, laughter filled the air. Officers were celebrating with drinks and conversation, releasing pent-up stress after months of hard work. Carla Ayala Palacios, a well-respected officer known for her discipline and friendly smile, was among them. But as midnight neared, a sudden, violent event occurred inside. one of the patrol cars parked outside. In moments, the joyful atmosphere turned to chaos. Carla's fate was sealed. The night of celebration turned dark when she disappeared, sparking a controversial investigation that would become one of the most memorable in El Salvador's history. Carla Ayala Palacios was born around 1977 in El Salvador. As a teenager, she worked at a small pizzeria while studying accounting at the National School of Commerce. She was a disciplined student with a quiet determination and dreamed of dedicating her life to public service. Eventually, she enrolled in the National Academy of Public Security, where she completed her training and began her path toward law enforcement. In March 1998, at just 19 years old, Carla proudly returned home to tell her mother that she had been officially accepted into the National Civil Police. Her mother, however, was far from happy. She feared the dangers that came with the job, tried to dissuade her daughter, but Carla, calm and resolute, assured her that nothing bad would happen. From that moment on, her life became one of service, sacrifice, and integrity. Carla's early assignments took her to rural areas in eastern El Salvador, then to various municipalities surrounding the capital. Later, she worked in a historically significant town before being transferred to a busy district on the outskirts of San Salvador. There, she joined the Internal Affairs Unit, a division that demanded professionalism, discretion, and moral strength. Over nearly 2 decades of service, Carla earned the respect of colleagues and superiors alike. She was known for her discipline, her sense of duty, her quiet but commanding presence. Outside of work, Carla was deeply devoted to her family. Her loved ones described her as cheerful, responsible, and resilient, a woman who smiled easily but stood firm in her convictions. By 2017, she lived with her long-term partner, Lucio, also a police officer with more than 20 years of experience, along with their 2 teenage children and her mother. Life was not always easy, but Carla managed to balance it all. Before heading to work each morning, she would wake early to sell sandwiches, pastries, and coffee, earning a few extra dollars to support her family and spoil her kids. On the morning of December 28, 2017, Carla left her home around 4:30 a.m., carrying her usual tray of snacks and drinks. She expected to return with around $30 in profit, just as she had many times before. But that morning would be the last time her family ever saw her alive. Later that afternoon, Carla called Lucio to tell him she would attend a New Year's gathering organized by the Elite Police Reaction Group, an event meant for members and their families. She explained that she was invited to attend by her colleague Jenny. The party began in the early evening. According to the entry log, Carla and Jenny arrived together around 6:30 p.m. The atmosphere was festive: music, raffles, laughter, and plenty of alcohol, though drinking was strictly forbidden during official functions. Witnesses later said that Carla and Jenny appeared relaxed, happy, mingling with other officers as the night went on. By around 11 o'clock p.m., Jenny offered Carla a place to stay for the night, but Carla politely declined, saying she preferred to sleep in her own bed. At 11:18 p.m., she called Lucio one last time, telling him she would be driven home in a police vehicle once the celebration ended. Her voice was calm, steady, no hint of fear or worry. No one could have guessed that this would be the last time Lucio would ever hear from her. A few minutes later, Carla climbed into a patrol truck. Jenny noticed who was inside. Ovidio Antonio Pacheco Morales was at the wheel. Wilfredo Deras Hernandez sat in the passenger seat, and Juan Josue Castillo Arevalo occupied the back seat beside Carla. Juan, the son of a retired officer, was known as a disciplined yet unpredictable man. He was quiet, intense, and sometimes volatile. Before joining the elite reaction group, he had served as a regular officer in the National Civil Police. Not long after Carla left, Jenny received a message from her at 11:26 p.m. Carla asked if Jenny had forgotten something at the party. Jenny immediately replied, but Carla never answered again. That simple exchange would become the last trace of her alive. Growing uneasy, Jenny tried calling and texting throughout the night. 8 attempts in total, but none went through. Meanwhile, back home, Lucio began to worry. Hours passed with no word from his wife. Carla was never the type to ignore messages, and deep down, Lucio felt something was wrong. His instincts were right. At some point during the ride, everything changed. According to later testimonies, after receiving a phone call, Juan suddenly drew his weapon and fired inside the truck. Hitting Carla, the deafening gunshot shattered the silence. Shocking the 2 other officers, there had been no argument, no scream, only that single, deadly shot. When they demanded to know what had happened, Juan reportedly muttered coldly that she brought it on herself. Then, in a chilling outburst, he ordered them to dispose of her body immediately. One of the officers, Ovidio, tried to reason with him, insisting they should return to base and report the incident as an accident. Reluctantly, they turned back, arriving at the station around 12:12 a.m. On December 29th, the guards who greeted them had no idea what horror lay inside the vehicle. According to later statements, when they stopped, the 2 officers disarmed Juan and left him in the truck with Carla's body while they went to notify a superior. But in a moment of distraction, Juan seized his chance. He jumped behind the wheel, sped out of the compound, and vanished into the night, taking both the patrol vehicle and Carla's lifeless body with him around 2:30 a.m. blank. The phone rang inside the unit's meeting room, where several senior officers, including Wilfredo and Ovidio, had gathered. On the line was Juan himself. Wilfredo answered, trying to keep his composure. Juan's voice was calm, eerily so, as he confessed that he was somewhere in eastern El Salvador and had already taken care of Carla. Juan's tone was strangely composed, even defiant. The call went on for several minutes. Wilfredo tried to convince him to surrender, insisting that the vehicle could be traced, but Juan dismissed it, claiming everything was under control. Behind the scenes, a small team of officers was quietly assembled. Their orders were simple: capture Juan the moment he appeared. The unit's commander approved the plan and ordered the men to prepare for an arrest operation. 15 minutes before 5 o'clock am, Juan suddenly reappeared at the base, driving the same patrol truck he had escaped with hours earlier. He stepped out casually, dressed in shorts, a t-shirt, and sandals, as if nothing had happened. Approaching the main gate, he called out to the duty commander, who was busy wrapping up the night's paperwork. Juan tossed him the patrol keys and said, almost nonchalantly, that he was no longer part of this group. Then he turned to walk away. The commander immediately raised the alarm, but no one responded. The capture team, it seemed, had fallen asleep. He could only watch from a distance as Juan strode toward the exit. Moments later, several officers rushed to intercept him near the gate. They managed to grab him briefly, but Juan fought back violently, broke free, and started running. The commander, bound by protocol, stayed at his post, helplessly watching as 3 or 4 gunshots cracked through the early morning air. Outside the compound, help was already waiting. A getaway car sat idling nearby. Driven by Juan's brother and brother-in-law, officers gave chase, firing at the fleeing vehicle. The pursuit ended at a roundabout along the main boulevard, where the car was forced to stop. But before the officers could move in, another vehicle suddenly appeared, blocking their path. In the chaos, Juan jumped out and disappeared into the fading darkness. At first, the National Civil Police treated the incident as an internal matter, but as details emerged, the missing officer, the involvement of multiple policemen, and the chaotic chain of command, the public began to suspect a cover-up. Under mounting pressure, the Attorney General's office took control of the case, working alongside the police amid growing outrage. The investigation quickly became a maze of contradictions and irregularities. It soon appeared that the very institution tasked with uncovering the truth might be shielding those responsible. Forensic teams found unsettling evidence at the elite police reaction base, bloodstains near the patrol truck, around the front bumper, behind the left rear wheel, inside the cabin, especially on the back seat and door frame. A thin trail of blood stretched down the entrance ramp. Inside the truck, investigators discovered a bullet lodged in the interior, tangled with strands of hair and specks of blood. Officers swore that Carla's body had never been removed from the vehicle, yet the evidence told another story. The contradictions deepened when the security camera footage capturing Juan's escape mysteriously vanished. 6 weeks later, on February 14, 2018, with no sign of Carla, the director of the National Civil Police announced the dissolution of the Elite Reaction Group. A new unit, he claimed, would be created to restore public trust. But the announcement did little to calm the fury sweeping through El Salvador. The case was only growing darker. There were too many conflicting accounts, and too many officers claiming ignorance or innocence. The official explanation was that Carla's death was an accident, a drunk officer, a stray bullet, and a panicked escape. However, inconsistencies and the intentional hiding of evidence suggested a darker truth. Juan's odd phone call before he came back indicated he had assistance. His request to have his personal car ready hinted that someone inside the base might have knowingly helped him escape. The police later claimed it was all part of a strategy to lure him back and arrest him. But that explanation quickly fell apart. During subsequent inspections, investigators found Juan's car abandoned inside the compound, the door open and the keys still on the floor mat, as if waiting for him. The inconsistencies piled up. The police director publicly denied that the patrol truck had a GPS tracker, but the chief prosecutor for violent crime stated otherwise. The vehicle did have a tracker, and it had recorded Juan's movements. According to those records, he had driven eastward toward a rural area shortly after fleeing the base, and the most haunting question of all remained unanswered. Where exactly had Carla been shot? Months passed with no clarity. No one knew where her body was, or what Juan had done with it. For Carla's family, the uncertainty was unbearable. Every dawn that passed without answers was a cruel reminder that truth and justice seemed as distant. In March 2018, the small financial support the police had been giving Carla's family, barely $100 to $200 a month, was suddenly cut off. From that day on, all they received was a simple food basket, left with almost nothing. They survived on Lucio's modest salary. The children, still in high school, became their grandmother's only source of hope. She often told herself that one day, when they started working, they would help her manage the bills. Despite her failing health, she refused to stop fighting. Some days, she even traveled alone to San Salvador to earn a few dollars by ironing clothes. As the months passed, hope faded. The possibility of finding Carla alive grew smaller with each day. Whispers began to circulate. Whispers that powerful people were involved, that some officers stayed silent out of fear, and that the very institution charged with seeking justice preferred to look away. Eventually, Jesuit University, through its Human Rights Institute, stepped in and joined the case as a private prosecutor. Authorities also offered a $5,000 reward for any information leading to Juan's capture. Months went by, 250 days of searching, waiting. and despair until the truth finally surfaced. On September 7th, 2018, investigators found human remains in a rural area of eastern El Salvador. Alongside them were a yellow metal chain, a silver ring, and fragments of clothing. The body was badly decomposed, but DNA testing confirmed the worst. It was Carla. One unmistakable detail gave certainty: her right ulnar bone still bore a metal plate with 5 screws, the same one inserted years earlier after a fracture. Investigators later learned that her body had first been buried in another clandestine grave before being moved. Carla's family finally received her remains. The vigil was somber, but brought a painful sense of closure. On September 21st, 2018, under heavy police security, Carla was laid to rest. As her coffin was lowered into the ground, fellow officers saluted the woman who had proudly worn the badge for 19 years. But even after her burial, the case remained increasingly mysterious. In 2019, during a major police operation, several of Juan's relatives, including his father and brother, were arrested. They were accused of belonging to a criminal organization that linked elite police units with civilians to carry out violent crimes for money. Investigators revealed that the group operated in eastern El Salvador, disguised in police or military uniforms. They staged fake raids, entered homes under false pretenses, and executed or kidnapped victims, many of them gang members. Juan, it turned out, was part of this death squad. He maintained close ties with its leader and directly benefited from its network. The bullet from Juan's service weapon had struck Carla's in the face, causing catastrophic injuries. Forensic experts determined that, had she received immediate medical attention, she likely would have survived. But Wilfredo and Ovidio, who had been with her, did nothing. Both were later charged with aggravated femicide by omission. Juan, meanwhile, was accused as the direct perpetrator and tried in absentia as he remained a fugitive. Juan Josué Castillo Arevalo was sentenced to 50 years in prison, the maximum sentence for the aggravated murder of a woman. Juan's sentence was added to the one he received on March 2, when the San Miguel trial court sentenced Juan to 60 years in prison for the murders of 2 men in the provinces of Usulután and San Miguel between 2016 and 2017, when he was a member of an organization specializing in contract killings. Finally, in October 2020, nearly 3 years after the murder, 6 police officers and 3 civilians received prison sentences of between 6 and 8 years for facilitating Juan's escape and covering up the crime. Among them, alongside Juan Josué Castillo Arevalo, 4 former police officers: Wilfredo Deras Hernández, Ovidio Antonio Pacheco Morales, Pablo Antonio Estrada Villalobos, and Alex Obdulio López Martínez, also faced judgment that afternoon. All were found guilty of neglect of duty while performing official functions. Wilfredo, Ovidio, Pablo received 8-year prison sentences, while Alex was sentenced to 7 years. The rest were acquitted in July 2021. The National Civil Police decided to disband the elite police reaction group less than 2 months after Carla Ayala's murder and disappearance, and replace it with another elite police unit called the Jaguars. The police agency was also ordered to pay Carla Ayala's family $50,000 in compensation and to publicly apologize. The true motive behind Carla's murder remains shrouded in controversy. Some officials, including the former National Police Director, insisted it was nothing more than the reckless act of a drunken, violent man, one who harbored a deep resentment toward women. Others, however, pointed to a far more unsettling possibility: that Carla had been quietly working for internal affairs and had uncovered something she was never meant to find, silencing her. They believed was the only way to protect those entangled in corruption. For prosecutors, the case became a stark illustration of institutional violence, a chilling example of how power, when left unchecked, can be weaponized not to defend justice, but to destroy it. Today, Juan Castillo Arevalo is still at large, his name etched on the list of El Salvador's 100 most wanted fugitives,